Hello and welcome to another Frenchman learns about the history of Japan, and I guess not just the history, but many subjects about Japan. And yeah, today we're gonna check out some art history of many of the periods that we covered over the last few weeks, where we covered the overall history from the Paleolithic, Jomon to I guess Essay era basically. And yeah, I had found this channel and this playlist video a while ago, and I wanted to watch it, even though it does not cover every period. It still should be pretty interesting. This is a channel called Little Art Talks, which unfortunately seems defunct. They haven't uploaded in like 3 years, and most of the videos are from like 10 years ago, right? But I still thought this could be interesting. It seems to cover like a lot of the early era, Heian, Jomon, Asuka, Nara, and a lot of like the different art maybe of the time, potentially even architecture. Yeah, stuff that's kind of interesting because in any kind of like history video about the time, you might see some art of the time, but it's very different. You don't have much context of like what is depicting, how it was made, the technique of the time, what was the common idea of the art of the time and stuff like that. So I'm kind of interested, I can't lie. So that's what we're gonna watch today, this channel. And yeah, this is the first of the Japan history and learning stream that we're doing after I finished last time, learning of every era in chronological order. We finished with essay, and yeah, so today we're doing this. Next time it might be a stream about many different subjects, right? I want to do a stream learning about different festivals, another stream about the samurai, one about ninjas, one about yakuza. There's so many topics that we can cover. And as long as I find some YouTube video about it, that's not AI, because it's just, I don't want to watch more AI video. I'm so tired of those. It's a shame that sometimes for a topic, they're the only one that I can find. But yeah, nonetheless, if you guys have any suggestion for a topic, or for a channel, or for videos you want me to watch, don't hesitate. I won't say I'll do it right away, but I'm keeping many playlists. And again, I'm going to be doing this for a very long time. There's so much I want to learn about, so don't hesitate. But yeah, link to the playlist in the description with all the videos. Of course, check out the original channel, even though it seems dead. Sad. Link to my Discord if you want to follow me. My stream element, Patreon, where you can support me, request reaction, that kind of stuff. And yeah, is there much more to say? I don't know. I mean, I'm probably not very familiar with a lot of the art of the time. Even when I was, doing the chronological order, right? A lot of the art used in the video that we watched, or that I found on Google for like maternal, they were art of like made in the 1600, 1700, 1800, and while they were looking like old school, they actually were just from this period, representing period from 1,000 years before or something. So I know that they were like not contemporary, I think is the term. But yeah, I guess today we're gonna check out art that is contemporary to the periods. I'm definitely interested. For example, like Jomon, we know the kind of like very wide hips sculpture, right? Which are kind of funny. I'm guessing as we go on, there's gonna be more like a lot of art is gonna be Buddha statues and stuff like that. Yeah, should be interesting. Again, this is just a little stream. I don't know if this is gonna be that long, but let's do it. More to say? No, I think that's it. I think that's the gist of it. Yeah, ready to get into it. So BGM off. So we'll start with the first video at the top. Japanese art history series introduction.
Hey everyone, welcome to Little Art Talks. My name is Karen, and today we're here in Kyoto, Japan at the Fushimi Inari, which is known for its thousands of vermilion torii gates that line the trail. The art of Japan reflects its fascinating history and diversity, and I'm excited to share it with you these upcoming weeks. We'll be covering the history of this country, its society, politics, culture, values, and beliefs over time, alongside some of the most famous artworks from values and beliefs over time, alongside some of the most famous.
That one on the left, Utagawa Hiroshige, by Utagawa Hiroshige is probably the most famous one. Like you see that one, copies of it everywhere.
Artworks from this country. Everything from Shinto shrines to ukiyo-e to super flat. We're covering it all here on Little Art Talks. I hope you guys are all excited for this series. Please subscribe to catch.
Alright, well, that was just the intro. Let's actually watch the first episode, which is Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun period.
We're kicking off a whole series of videos about Japanese art, and we're going to be covering everything from Shinto shrines to super flat. So let's start off with the very beginning with the Jomon period. The Jomon period, meaning straw rope, lasted from 10,000 BCE to 300 BCE.
Well, I learned something right away. Despite covering the Jomon period, I didn't realize that's what it meant.
While the origins of the Jomon period is disputed, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers who later practiced organized farming and built simple houses of wood and thatch set into shallow earthen pits. They're thought to be ancestors of the Ainu people who live in Hokkaido. They're known for these decorated pots which get these patterns by imprinting rope onto wet clay.
I wonder if that's actually the case, because from what we had learned in some of the video we watched, again, I'm sure all of this is very debated, right? I thought some of the early Jomon people came more from potentially even Europe, and they went all through Europe, eventually China, right? And they came toward Kyushu, right? What I always assumed the Ainu on Ezo came maybe more from upper China and Russia and the Sakhalin stretch of island.
The earliest pottery were smaller, round-bottom bowls that may have been used for boiling or storing food. They were made from coiled clay and fired on an open fire. Later, when people began following a more settled pattern of living, the vessels increased in size and became more elaborate in pattern and design. For example, this is a Middle Period jar, which is...
that is pretty cool, seriously. You really think things would be so much simpler back then? They wouldn't really go out of their way to make intricate design like that, so it's surprising, yeah. It's really some skills.
Very ornate in style, called flamewares. The scalloped edge becomes more exaggerated with thick grooves and curls. However, by the end of the period, the vessels become less flamboyant. The bottoms went from round-bottomed, which is suited for burying into the ground, to flat-bottomed, which is suited to place on a flat surface. They also created clay figures.
That's what I was talking about. Those look absolutely hilarious. I love them. I love a little statue replica of this. There's something so funny about it. It's kind of like a weirdly wide at the shoulders and at the hips, E.T., basically.
Figurines called dogu. The purpose of the dogu is unknown, but some scholars theorize that they acted like effigies or religious fetishes.
Yeah.
Many appear to be female with breasts or large abdomen,
Fetishes for a reason, I guess.
suggesting that they were associated with pregnancy or considered a mother goddess. The Yayoi period, meaning early spring, lasted from 300 BCE to 300 CE. This period was a time of mass migration, mainly from Korea, and they arrived in northern Kyushu. With them, they brought really important knowledge from abroad, such as iron, bronze, and wetland rice cultivation. As farming spread, land ownership marked one's social status, spurring a feudal system that would dominate much of Japan's history. This agrarian culture lived in permanent settled village communities made of thatched houses. During the Yayoi period, we see the appearance of new pottery styles. These vessels were produced on a potter's wheel and fired in kilns, unlike the Jomon period, which were made by hand. They were less ornate with smoother surfaces and practical functional shapes.
Yeah.
Jars which were made for storage, larger jars for cooking, and high-footed vessels were used to make offerings. More elaborate were the bronze ceremonial bells called dotaku. Cool. They are often decorated with geometric patterns, and even some have representations of domesticated animals and scenes of daily life. As a Yayoi population grew, society became more stratified and complex.
The golden seal, given by the Emperor of China.
With distinct social classes. Prestige objects seem to have been traded among chiefs, and clan nations developed. During the 2nd and 3rd centuries, clans fought among themselves until the 5th century, when the Yamato clan gained dominance. The Kofun period, meaning Old Tomb, lasted from 300 to 552. Rice cultivation concentrated in what is now called Kansai, an area according to Chinese records was called Yamato, ruled by a female shaman called Queen Himiko.
when we had done the video about this period, I really wanted to learn more about Queen Miko, and I tried to look for more videos, but I think she's from too much of a long time ago. There's not really that much to talk about that wasn't already covered in the video we watched. It's still very interesting, right? Like, you know, the farther you go, the more interesting it is to imagine like the life at the time and the life of a queen like this, right? But doesn't seem to be that much to really be sure about.
During this period, there were a number of distinct burial mounds, these megalithic kofun or tombs found in Kyushu and Honshu.
They're pretty cool.
These burial grounds with a keyhole shape were often surrounded by a moat and held a number of sophisticated artifacts, like bronze mirrors, armor, swords, and jewelry. Unglazed pottery figures called haniwa were buried under the circumference. Haniwa are clay representations of animals, objects, and humans, and were erected outside the tombs. Legend has it that haniwa were created when an empress who disliked the custom of servants and maids following their master in death ordered clay figures in place of sacrificing living beings for her burial mound.
It's a Chinese custom in the first place, right? It's kind of like that one tomb of a full army of full-skirted army that was buried alongside an emperor, right? I think it was a Chinese custom, yeah. And yeah, also, I guess if you go back even more, in Egypt they were doing that, right? I think in some of the pyramids and tombs, some of the emperors would have some people basically coming to die with them. I mean, a lot of culture like that, actually. Yeah. I don't like that, obviously. This sounds better.
However, the earliest haniwa forms found were simple cylindrical forms used like stakes to hold the burial mound in place.
Looks like an actual oil barrel. That's impressive.
So the authenticity of the story is questionable. After a while, these plain cylinders were decorated to various forms, like horses and human figures, taking
That's cute. That's actually pretty cute. People were artistic back then, huh?
On a more religious or symbolic meaning. These tombs point to a shift from the tribal headsmen to more powerful chieftains or larger domains, as they were able to raise a tremendous workforce to build these enormous mounds. People likely began to form political alliances to form a nation. Excavations of these imperial tombs are forbidden to this day.
Oh, really? Forbidden? Is there a reason for that? I know in China, for example, like they know the location of like a pretty incredible tomb or something, but you know they have to wait until technology get better because excavation would very likely mess it up and destroy a lot of it or something. I was reading about that recently. So they're basically just waiting. Time passes for better technology. Is it like that, or is it just forbidden for other reason? I wonder. Okay. Well, we covered a few nice things. Next we have Asuka and Nara period.
During the Asuka period, Buddhism was introduced to Japan through Korean statesmen who brought along with them Chinese practices. This was encouraged by devout leaders and led to major reforms in government, ethics, and education. The new religion spurred the creation of a number of very important Buddhist temples. Among them is Nara's Todaiji Temple. Let's take a closer look. Picking up from the last video, after the clans fought amongst themselves, the Yamato clan gained dominance. An imperial court was set up with the royal family at the center. Their rule was legitimized by the belief that they were descendants of the sun goddess Amaterasu, who is a supreme deity in the Shinto religion. The warrior clans who assisted the Yamato clan during the wars were given hereditary positions at court. Land outside of the Yamato were divided into provinces, and they were overseen by these aristocratic clans. They ruled more or less autonomously and kept a large portion of the revenues for themselves, so although the imperial house was technically the focus of government, they were relatively poor and powerless. The imperial court needed some restructuring if they were to centralize power. This period is defined by an accelerated adoption of Chinese culture, and they looked to the Chinese imperial government as a model for their new government structure. In 618, the Tang dynasty was established in China, beginning an almost 300-year reign that is often considered to be the greatest period of flowering. The capital, Chang'an, was the hub of Asia, often...
Is this the dynasty that the fictional dynasty in Apothecary Diaries is based on? It might be.
Compared to Rome's role in the Mediterranean. With access to the Silk Road and influence over neighboring countries, people of many different cultures gathered at the capital, making it a cultural hub not found anywhere else in the late 1st millennium CE. Japan was certainly not the only ones who highly regarded Tang China, and they were interested in Chinese administration, bureaucracy, medicine, feng shui, Confucianism, and writing. Active exchanges with China prompted major political, educational, and ethical reforms. This included Japan's first constitution based on Confucian principles. With new techniques and technologies in building and casting metals, there was a greater knowledge for more sophisticated architecture and sculpture. New techniques and ideas in media and writing led to more developed painting, decorative arts, music, literature, calligraphy, and poetry. The Chinese imperial system was a bureaucracy of officials with the emperor at the center. Provinces were administered by governors and officials appointed from this bureaucracy, but they could be made and recalled according to their decisions. So the power remained at the capital, and the revenue gathered in the provinces would go back into the imperial coffers. It took almost a century for Japan's first major steps towards this massive restructuring. Two key reformers were Soga no Umako and Umayado no Oji, more commonly known as Shoto.
I guess all of this part we've more or less covered already, but I guess it is background context for the art we're going to talk about, so I'll let it play. I mean, I could skip to the art part, but even if we've already covered it, I'm sure there's always some new information I might get, so I think it's fine.
A prince of the imperial house. The Soga clan were said to have descended from a noble of Korean Baekje in the 5th century. They were ambitious, gaining favor of the imperial family, but were unable to hold any of the hereditary court positions. Therefore, they had a lot to gain with the abolishment of the old government structure, replacing it with an appointed bureaucracy. In 587, Shotoku, the imperial guard, and the Soga clan engaged in open battle against those who opposed the restructuring. However, it wasn't until 645, with the Taika or Great Change reforms, that formal restructuring of both the imperial and provincial government was laid out. In the Japanese adoption of the Chinese template, the aristocratic clans were required to live in close proximity to the imperial seat of power. They had to serve the emperor at court rather than staying in their provincial strongholds. The reform furthered the centralization.
Something that Ieyasu would implement as well later on, right? 1,000 years later. I guess they already knew that here, but they kind of lost that logic eventually with all the shogunate and everything.
Of imperial power, and the lands were nationalized. Thus, new taxes began to flow through the central government. The officials who served during this bureaucracy were drawn from aristocratic clans and trained at a university near the imperial court called Daifakudo. There, they were taught Chinese Confucian classics in the Chinese language. However, the transformation of the way Japan would be governed would not be complete until 794 during the Heian period. Speaking of keeping them near the imperial court, let's talk about where exactly that was. They wanted a new permanent imperial capital that would be modeled on the, yep, you guessed it, Chinese Chang'an capital. The first attempt made in 694 with Fujiwara-kyo was in the Asuka Valley. Neatly laid out in a grid plan, the palace grounds at the heart of the city was surrounded by an earthen wall. The southern gate opened to a great courtyard with a great audience hall at the other end. North of that was the imperial residence.
It looks very nice too, with the little river in the middle of it, kind of breaking the monotony of everything being perfectly parallel.
The city also encompassed several Buddhist temples that had been founded before the city was constructed, including Askadera, the first great Buddhist foundation completed in 588. The capital was not used for very long and was abandoned in only 16 years. Some suggest that
was the same with the capitals back then, right? The amount of time they moved the capital, it was crazy.
The move was encouraged by an increased population, and an almost identical plan was built 13 miles to the north.
About what? Big Alley Old Lolliards? No, I have no idea what that is. I haven't learned about that.
Called Heijo Kyo. This period is known by Heijo's present name, Nara. The streets that divided up the city were larger and more spaced apart than they were
That
in
was short.
Fujiwara, and the palace enclosure was at the center of the northern perimeter, as the imperial palace was in Chang'an. The Shinto and Buddhist temples were re-established in the new capital, and an outer capital was built in the footholds to the east to accommodate the rebuilt Asuka-dera.
So
The
many
capital
capitals.
lasted longer than Fujiwara-ko.
Major art in Reiwa period. Is it? I mean, okay. I guess I don't know about it. Like, you mean right now this is the big thing? Interesting.
Serving as the capital for 84 years. One of the reasons often cited for the next move is that the government wanted to place some distance between the imperial seat and the principal temples that had gained quite a lot of influence. Buddhism originated in India and spread to China through the Silk Road as early as the 1st or 2nd century CE. According to Chinese historical records, Buddhism was introduced to Japan in 467 during the Kofun period.
Sorry.
However, the official
Your timeline is crazy. I was gonna say, like, where do you see that? I guess I don't use Twitter. I'm assuming Twitter, right? Or Pixiv maybe, but I don't use Pixiv either, so fair enough. I don't really know what are the big art trends these days. I kind of miss them, you know? Like, I used to, years ago, actually be on Twitter and see what the art trend were, you know, like that people would always draw a character in a certain pose or something. Like, you had the Jacko pose and stuff like that. But these days, I have no idea what's going on, to be honest.
introduction of Buddhism to Japan.
Oh yeah, no, actually, isn't the trend right now the golden bikini? That's the trend right now. Yes. Okay, so I know what's going on. Because I saw a VTuber clip about it.
Japan is dated to 552 in the Nihon Shoki. By the 5th century, Buddhism had long been established in China and was officially adopted by some Korean kingdom.
Okay, you know what? It is interesting, but this is really retreading what we've covered in the last 2 months. I'd really like to get to the part where she talks about, you know, the art specifically. Maybe around here.
This architecture a crucial foothold. Even with a slow start, Buddhism became more prominent as it became officially endorsed as an instrument of the state by rulers. Accordingly, more money was spent to construct large and elaborate Buddhist temples over the next century.
Temples and architecture is art.
Sponsored the
No
building
doubt.
of many temples in the Aksa area, including Horyuji. With the support of the imperial court, there was a great deal of money invested into building Buddhist complexes, leading to a rich tradition in Buddhist architecture, sculpture, and painting. Skilled artists and craftsmen from China and Korea came to Japan to build temples and sculptures, as well as teach their techniques and aesthetics to local craftsmen. Horyuji in Nara is one of the earliest examples from the 7th century that still exists today. The complex, arranged in a prescribed manner, includes the main worship hall, or the kondo.
The pagoda is always the most impressive, right? It's a cool building. It's almost like lasagna, I guess.
Meaning golden hall, and a 5-story pagoda. In the kondo, there is a number of important sculptures and art treasures that are preserved in these walls. Sculptor Tori Bushi, who followed the North Wei style, established the Tori School of Sculpture. 2 surviving works attributed to Tori Bushi are the Asuka-dera Buddha, made in early 7th century, and the Shaka Triad, which are the main icons of the Golden Hall of
Looks really
Horyuji.
cool, the triad.
Although the works have been restored over time, they retain many of the original features. The Asuka-dera Shaka sits erect with his legs crossed and his right hand raised in the Samui-in mudra, or hand gesture, which symbolizes Buddha's power to grant tranquility and freedom from fear. The left hand is lowered with the palm facing upwards, a gesture of wish granting and the promise that Buddha's teachings are the true path to release from suffering. The drapery of his clothing is sharply defined in regular folds. The head of the Asuka-dera Buddha is the least restored, with a long, cylindrical face.
Buddhism has been influencing Japanese art, and I wonder if there's a country without any religious influence, how its art would be. Good question, good question. I don't know. There must be some country that's way less religious, but, you know, there'd still be a some to an extent, I don't know. Good question. But at the same time, like, I don't know if it's really possible because, you know, humans just come up with religion, right? Like, it's kind of needed in time of hardships and all that, so, you know, that's why even a small tribe in the middle of the Amazon forest, they probably have some semblance of like deities and religion. It just happens naturally, I guess, with human beings. But you know, life is so complicated that we have to believe there's something bigger like a god. So I think it's just impossible, yeah. I think it's impossible. But it's interesting as an idea.
His face is strongly geometric and linear, with a sharply defined nose and eyes. The hair is depicted as a mass of snail shell curls, one of the physical symbols that distinguishes Buddha as the perfected being. These symbols are called shogo, and the other two shogo seen here are the raised circle above his nose and the cranial protuberance. Yep, that's not your average man bun, that's a protuberance. Both are symbols.
So it's his brain, he has like a second brain? Okay.
Of his greater wisdom and understanding. Other works in this Torii style includes the Kanen Bodhisattva of Yumendono Hall. In the following Hakuho period, some of the important Buddhist sculptures show up.
We didn't learn about Akuo period, or I guess it was just not mentioned as Akuo period. Maybe it was just bundled with another one.
A prominent Tang China influence, as seen in sculptures preserved from the Yakushiji Kondo. Tang arts were characterized by Indian and Central Asian influences from the Silk Road, such as three-dimensionality and realism achieved through modeled forms. The sculptures in Asuka during this time have a more soft, supple pose and full body that contrasts with the more rigid Torii style. The skirts and scarves cling to his body like wet cloth, which shows his body underneath. The long robe flows over the rectangular throne, falling in irregular folds. His left arm is extended, holding a medicine jar that is now lost, and his right hand is raised in the Ani-en gesture, indicating explication of a teaching. During the Nara period, Buddhist sculpture becomes increasingly realistic. A massive project that took place during this period was the construction of the Todai
this looks really cool.
Temple. The most important commission was the colossal image of the Daibutsu. The one in Todaiji today is a reconstruction from 1192. The Fuku Kenjaku Cannon is an impressive depiction from the Nara period. Cool. The dry lacquer sculpture is covered in gold leaf, constructed under the direction of Kuninaka Kimimaro. The sculpture's name, meaning cannon of the never-empty lasso, refers to the ability and the strength of this figure to lasso beings ensnared in delusion and bring them to the safety of enlightenment. A very popular bodhisattva, Cannon is often depicted as a female figure in later periods, but is depicted as a male in earlier works. The deity has an extra eye at the center of the forehead and 8 arms, 2 in front of the chest in prayer, and the other 6 radiating outwards, holding symbols of this manifestation: the lotus blossom of Buddhist wisdom, a pilgrim's staff, and a lasso.
Isn't there also like a god of war deity that's got that many arms? Yeah. Good novels like Dragon Ball or JoJo could have appeared 1,000 years ago without religious evaluation. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there was story back then, and you know, there's some pretty crazy story, right, of like heroes and journeys and stuff like that. I don't especially know about Japan, but you know, in many countries already back then, there is kind of crazy stories. I mean, even like religious story, right? They tend to be about like, you know, powerful heroes, right? I mean, like, I don't know, most of the gods like could fight because they are so powerful, so it's not so different. It's not so different.
The 8 arms are related to an esoteric or tantric.
I mean, the god of manga, Osamu Tezuka, doesn't he have a manga called Buddha, literally? And it's one of its most famous manga.
Teachings in Japanese Buddhism, which will become more prominent over the next century. Behind the cannon is a halo of metal openwork. The lines represent the golden light that radiates from the cannon's body. On his head is a silver crown with a standing Amida Buddha, of whom he is a manifestation. The Shu Kongojin is a great example of a more naturalistic style of the second quarter.
I always wanted to read that one. the adult one. It seems very interesting. I still haven't read much or seen much Tezuka, and I really need to. I guess I've only seen the anime of Dororo, and Itamani no Ki. Yeah. I've seen the movie Metropolis, so 3 things, that's it. Yeah. I haven't seen too much by Tezuka. I need to.
Order of the 8th century. Standing at 6 feet tall, the fierce figure made of painted clay is a guardian, warding off evil spirits with his exaggerated face. He is clad in a colorful Chinese-style armor and clutches a diamond thunderbolt. Despite having both feet planted to the ground, there's a great sense of movement from his posture and floating scars. Even his armor seems to sway gracefully. The popping eyes and large veins in his neck and arms leaves no mystery.
Whoa, I didn't see that at first. My man was doing steroid 1000 years ago. That's a lot of steroids to have your veins pop out like this.
At his strength. In the late Nara period, we see a shift from the elegant realism to a more sober, stylized aesthetic. The Birushana Buddha at Tosho Daiji is a large 10-foot-tall sculpture made with the hollow dry lacquer technique and is covered in gold leaf. Although fully modeled, the figure is more stylized with a full body. The face is almost spherical, curving upwards and outwards, and has thin, elongated eyes and eyebrows that almost reach the hairline. His neck is short and thick. In contrast, the drapery of his robe is thin and delicately falls in irregular folds across the torso and the left. Behind him is a wooden halo covered with hundreds of tiny seated Buddhas and their attendant bodhisattvas, emphasizing his position as the universal Buddha. The Nara period drew to
yeah, I think you had shared one before.
An end when the imperial capital moved to Heian. Although the new capital was built along the same Chinese imperial plan as Fujiwara and Heizhou, it was unlike them in that it served as the imperial capital for more than 1,000 years, until the emperor's removal to Tokyo in 1968. Thanks so much for watching this video.
Okay. Well, a lot of Buddhist art, I guess that makes sense when you think about it. Once religion really becomes a thing, a lot of the art becomes religious art for a while. Art doesn't really become, what would be the word, detached from religion until later, right? Where religion maybe loses a bit of its power or something. But yeah, early on it would be a lot of Buddhist art. It makes sense. I like some of it, you know. I think a lot of it, when it's like Buddha statue, it starts to look the same, right? No matter how cool it is in terms of a piece of art, right? But yeah, interesting nonetheless. Next we have the early Heian period. The Heian period should be full of stuff, yeah.
The Heian era is often referred to as a period of peace and tranquility. The government introduced a more esoteric form of Buddhism to Japan from time.
Watching many big Buddhism statues, I wonder if the top of Japan wanted to use the money to make Japan better. I mean, that's always one of those things with stuff like this, right? So, you know, I understand why people need religion, but when you start spending so much money for church, art and religious stuff, rather than like, you know, more like improving the country, the facilities, the infrastructure, yeah, that's when I do have a problem with it. I think religion is fine, but you shouldn't spend that much money on all this. Any religion where you have to like donate to prove your faith and build like massive statue, you know, I would start questioning it.
China, and a great appreciation for arts rose in court life. Let's take a closer look at the history and art of the Heian period. The Heian period is marked by the move of the capital to Heian-kyo in 794, where it remained until 1868 when the court moved to Tokyo. Today, this city is known for its long and rich history and is now called Kyoto. The move is traditionally ascribed to Emperor Kanmu and the court, who wanted to distance the secular seat of power from the centers of the 6 Buddhist schools. During the Nara period, an ambitious monk named Ryokyo became very powerful and influential during the reign of Empress Shotoku. After he healed her of a serious illness, she honored him with titles and power, and it's even alleged that they had an affair. However,
Oh,
there
no.
was kind of an ordeal when he tried to take a seat on the throne. There was an oracle that predicted there would
I remember that, yeah.
be peace if he became emperor. A high-ranking official was sent to verify the prediction, and the second oracle that came said that since he is not of imperial lineage, he should not be named emperor, and that wicked people who sought the throne as such should be swept away. And of
Is this the kind of like genesis of the whole thing of like only blood matter for imperial throne, yeah? Or even shogun eventually?
course, Dokyo exiled that official. In the end, when the empress died, Dokyo was banished from Nara, so as a result, the capital moved to Heian and the Nara temples did not move with them. New esoteric Buddhist sects were imported from China with state support to reduce the power of the temples in Nara, two major sects being the Tendai and Shingon. The more studious and ascetic Tendai became the state sect, while the Shingon entranced the aristocracy with its mysterious rituals. Just as the previous capitals Fujiwara and Heijo, Heian's location was selected because it satisfied Chinese geometry requirements. It was flanked on three sides by mountains and was bordered by two relatively large rivers. Also like them, it was laid out in a rectangular grid. Since there was a conscious effort to distance the court from religious powers, there were...
Like, it makes sense to build a city in a, perfectly parallel rectangular or square grid like this, right? It makes sense for, like, efficiency, but it's kind of too mathematical, you know what I mean? Like, too perfect. I think I like it more when a city looks a bit more varied, even though it might be like more complicated for moving, but I can't imagine like walking through a city that's just perfectly built like this non-stop. Is it hard to remember Japanese historical words in alphabet? Is it? I mean, what word do you mean? If you mean like the period name, like Eya, Nara, Jomon, Kofun, not really. They're pretty simple words.
Only two major Buddhist temples that were allowed within the boundaries of the city's original plans, Toji and Saeji. They were positioned near the southern boundaries as the city's spiritual guardians at the primary entrance, but also positioned far away from the emperor and the government. One thing to keep in mind is that the aristocracy living in the capital was only a small percentage of the population, no more than 1,000 people, but their tastes set the tone for artistic creation during this time. It was a time when gentlemen and gentlewomen were expected to be highly refined, products of and contributors to a highly refined courtly aesthetic. The clothes they wore were elaborate with
Johnny Itori, a 12-layer robe, 12-layer. Wow.
multiple layers of silk cut in a specific fashion specific to men.
Kanji has meaning, so learning word without kanji feels like learning English word without spelling. Yeah, I guess it's true. I mean, it's kind of like earlier I learned that Jomon meant straw something. I forgot already. It is true. Everything has meaning, I mean, yeah.
And women, the ideal beauty of women were to have a round face with small features, long, straight black hair, white powdered faces with eyebrows plucked and penciled in.
I never understood the white powdered faces thing. That's obviously later even more prominent with geisha, more than anything. I never understand that. Like, why? I understand makeup, but just making your face white, like a ghost, why is that, like, attractive? I mean, don't get me wrong, geisha, for example, can look good, but, like, it's such a weird one.
And teeth blackened.
Oh yeah, that too. I forgot that's the thing, teeth blackened. What?
The ideal man would also have a round face with small features. With a strong hierarchy
Is my face round enough? It's a bit oval, maybe. I think I'm losing.
in place, advantageous marriages were often arranged by parents, as it was the best way for a man to gain rank, both for the father marrying off his child and a son marrying a daughter of higher rank. It was also common for men to have several wives, as women at the time often died young and in childbirth. And again, the man can advance in rank with strategic marriages of his children, so it was ideal to have a lot of them. The life of a noblewoman was not all that great from today's perspective. We know from diaries that custom required her to remain hidden from the eyes of all men, except for her father and husband. Shaded in the world of the shinden, or mansion, behind folding screens with a household of servants, she rarely needed to do housekeeping or raising the children or caring for her husband. She passed her
Japanese or East Asian people still tend to think white face is beautiful. Yeah, but at the same time, like here they were talking about like literally white, you know, when people say like white people were not actually white in terms of like color, right? I mean, I don't think this is white, it's a different type of color, right? But here they were talking about like literally using white makeup to look like blank white, pure white. Like a geisha again, which I still don't understand why people thought that was that good of a look. Because white people don't actually look white in color per se, right? Albino people look white, yeah.
Time with festivals and ceremonies, practicing calligraphy and musical instruments. Women were taught to read and write and were even allowed to inherit property. But since they did not oversee administration of their economic affairs, they still needed the assistance from either a husband, male relative, lover, or retainer. Certain areas of studies were limited to men, such as Confucian classics and Chinese characters. In the beginning of the 9th century,
I feel like a lot of this was clearly like the same way the religion, the way to build stuff was taken from China. Unfortunately, it seems like this system of like, you know, like, what's the word for it? Discrimination of a woman was taken by China, right? Because as we saw a couple hundred years before that, there was Queen Himiko, there was literal like queen leaders, right? But then once they start taking like the culture of China, unfortunately they copied some of the bad part like this as well. It's always interesting when that happens. You can read them. I can read some hiragana and katakana, yeah. Shi, su, te, tsu, to, no. I know some of them.
a system of writing called hiragana was introduced, where it was a purely Japanese syllabary. This system was what women were encouraged to use, so even great works of literature by women from this time, such as the famous Genji Monogatari or the Tale of Genji, were almost entirely composed in hiragana script. They were also really into poetry and calligraphy, like really into it. This was a time when the aristocracy used poetry not only to judge the other person's knowledge and character, but also for everyday communication between friends, family, lovers, and even government officials.
And eventually, people dying in the same group day would start writing their death poem, which was something.
Many Japanese poem forms have developed, the most famous of them being the haiku. The Heian period spans over 4 centuries and is divided into 3 distinct phases: early Heian, middle Heian or Fujiwara, and late Heian or Insei. Since there's a lot of ground to cover, like 4 centuries of it, this video will be split into 2 parts. This video will cover the early Heian, and a part 2 will cover the middle and late Heian. The early Heian period began with a continued adherence to Chinese models, but by the end of the 1st century there was an overwhelming sense that there was nothing more to gain from contact with China, and in 894 the imperially sponsored embassies to Tang China were officially discontinued. In 907, the Tang dynasty fell, and while trade continued between the countries, the Japanese court and aristocracy increasingly looked to themselves. Architecture, painting, and sculpture were reworked to suit a newly emerging national taste. From the Asuka to Nara periods, Chinese objects were seen as prized possessions of the state. But in the Heian period, while the demand for imported karae or Chinese-style screens seemed to have continued unabated, the aristocratic preference in other crafts, particularly lacquer and metalwares, seemed to have shifted to those of the Japanese-style decoration. One of the major events of the early Heian period is the introduction of the Tendai and Shingon Buddhist sects. It was felt that the teachings and rituals of the 6 schools of Nara were aimed primarily at securing material benefits for the state and their wealthy aristocratic patrons, and not at spiritual attainment and enlightenment. The two new schools refocused Japanese Buddhism on the serious matter of philosophy and practice, and the sculpture and painting that they produced in the first century of Heian period tended to address this new seriousness in Buddhist matters, leaving behind the light and cool elegance of 8th century Heijo. At the heart of Tantric teachings is the concept that Buddha possesses two aspects: the phenomenal body, manifested in the earthly emanations of Buddha as Shaka, and the absolute or ineffable body, which is expressed by the supreme or transcendental Buddha, such as Vipassana. The concept of the non-duality of Buddha, the phenomenal and the transcendental bodies of the Buddha are not separate entities, but rather different manifestations of the same absolute principle, is expressed in the new object.
The more I learn about Buddhism, the more it's like insanely complicated because of how much branch there is and how much version of Buddha and everything there is, right? There's so much.
Objects of worship, including the two realms mandala, which diagrams the two realms called the womb world and the diamond world. A mandala refers to a diagram of the spiritual universe, portrayed abstractly in the mind, in three-dimensional sculptural and architectural forms, and in two-dimensional images. The womb world mandala is composed of 12 precincts or courts arranged in concentric zones and expresses the many facets of Buddha's nature. Dainichi Norai sits at the center of an 8-petaled lotus flower with his hands in a meditation gesture. To his north, south, east, and west are 4 transcendental Buddhas with 4 bodhisattvas in between. Framing this are 4 distinct precincts: the Court of Universal Knowledge, the Court of Wisdom, Vajra's Holder's Court, and the Lotus Holder's Court. In the second and third layers are courts of bodhisattvas, and the outermost layer contains various guardian figures. The Diamond Realm Mandala consists of 9 rectangles, each representing a Buddha world. All deities depicted are fully enlightened beings. At the center is the attainment of Buddhahood assembly with Dainichi Norai at the center of the middle circle, surrounded by 4 bodhisattvas. At the center of each of the 4 circles are 4 transcendental Buddhas, surrounded by bodhisattvas. At the center top rectangle is Dainichi, making the gesture for Wisdom Fist. According to the Shingon doctrine, one can attain enlightenment in this existence through contemplation and rituals using a paired mandala. By visualizing the symbols of spiritual world that are depicted in the mandala, one learns the 3 mysteries of the body, word, and thought, which cannot be expressed in words.
So just meditation, basically. Like all this just means meditate a lot.
By meditating on and performing rituals in front of the 2 mandalas and repeating of one's secret mantra, anyone can become one with Dainichi Norai and achieve enlightenment. An example of a sculptural mandala can be found in Toji. The nearly life-sized images are arranged on a low altar. At the center of the platform is Dainichi Norai, surrounded by the 4 transcendental Buddhas. To the east is a set of the 5 limitless wisdom bodhisattvas, 4 of which are arranged around the most important.
Haiku is normally 575, but there is 3 haiku. You can ignore the letter length rule. Sekiwo Shitemo Itori, Through Coughing I'm Alone, is the most famous. I read it in my textbook and felt nonsense. I won't lie, while I've been explained what haiku is before from watching some anime like, well, in some anime they do it, or there's also like, Senryu, with that anime Senryu Shoujo. I don't really understand poetry in the first place, like even in French or other language. I've never really like looked into poetry myself, so I couldn't even do poetry. If you asked me to do poetry, I'd need to like first really learn about how to do it, because I kind of remember it was talked about in school, but I didn't listen because I wasn't really interested when I was young. So yeah, I don't fully understand poetry. I mean, I understand that there's like a rule of, the number of like syllable and word and how it's arranged, basically. I understand that. But it's still like, too advanced for me. I feel like I don't think I'd be able to come up with any good poetry.
Ongo Haramitsu. To the west are the 5 wisdom kings. Again, 4 of them are grouped around the most important Fudo. At the four corners are the four guardian kings, and the figures in between them are Bonten and Taishakuten. This arrangement isn't based on a known sutra, but likely is an attempt to combine new and old into a synthetic whole. Of the original 21 images, the 5 Buddhas and the Kongo Haramitsu are later replacements. Today, all the images face south, but in earlier times, the figures of the extreme west and east would have faced outwards, so they would face the viewer as they circumambulated the mandala. Compared to the earlier Nara sculptures, the Toji Bodhisattva sculptures have greater bulk and more solid volume than earlier works. They have a sensuality that earlier works lack. The majority of each sculpture is carved from a single block of wood, with cavities scooped out of the back and head and torso to prevent the wood from drying out unevenly and causing surface cracks. The forearms and the front of the knees are carved from separate pieces of wood joined to the central part of the statue. Details of the hair, face, upper body, and feet have been modeled in lacquer and glued to the plain wood surface. Then, the bodhisattvas were covered with lacquer and covered with gold leaf, while the mule...
It really looks so good that you wouldn't think it was made of wood in the first place, yeah? Yeah. I would have made more Ikemen Buddha.
were covered with gofun gesso.
Wait, this looks really cool. This is a Buddha? The one on the right?
And decorated in bright colors.
It's got like Dragon Ball hairstyle.
And rich textile patterns, similar to the Nara period sculptures in Todaiji. The earliest temple to reflect the teachings of the Shingon and Tendai schools is Jingoji, near Mount Takao. A standing Yakushi image in Jingoji is thought to be the main icon of an older temple, Jinganji, probably completed in 793 and later moved to its current temple. The figure of the healing Buddha is life-sized with thick limbs. He holds a medicine jar in the left hand and a fear not or samui in gesture with the right. The drapery cut into deep folds is tight against the widest part of the thigh. The left shoulder and drapery folds are slightly higher than those of the right, making him appear to turn slightly to the left. It's a subtle detail that gives movement to the large piece. The face is almost brooding in quality, adding to the overall effect of something strange, supernatural, and
it does look like he's aura farming, yeah.
Not particularly welcoming. Carved out of a single block of Japanese cypress, which was not hollowed out, the image features some serious cracks that are now repaired. Traces of paint remain on the face. Red lips, black pupils, and whites on the eye, blue snail shell curls, and the rest was unpainted. It's believed that this is one of the earliest examples of single block carving called ichiboku, a technique that appeared primarily...
I'm sure there's many, yeah? Like, there's a lot of statue out there, like... So, definitely. But, you know... Yeah, I'm assuming, like, any... Like, actually, I was gonna say, like, there's probably some of any gods and deity, but I guess in Islam, I think you're not supposed to do art of Muhammad. So I guess that might be the one that doesn't have any... Well, I'm sure there's some somewhere, right? But for the most part, don't be that much, yeah?
In rural or suburban temples, as wood was the most readily available. Muroji is a mountain temple located southeast of Nara. Even before the site was chosen for the construction of a Buddhist temple, it was considered sacred by locals because of its unusual configuration of rocks and streams due to volcanic action. The buildings of the temple have been laid out on 3 levels. Midway up the mountain are the main buildings for worship.
Looks nice.
A golden hall or kondo, a Mirokudo or hall dedicated to the future Buddha Miroku, a building for the Kanjo initiation rites, and a 5-story pagoda. Of these structures, only the kondo and 5-story pagoda have survived from the early Heian period. The 5-story pagoda is considered to be the oldest structure on the temple complex, dating to the late Nara period or the early years of the 9th century. It is slender, about half the height.
I was gonna say it looks very well preserved, but damaged and rebuilt in the late 1990s. Fair enough. Is there any pagoda from back then that's, you know, true renovation, I'm sure, but actually is still original after all this time, I wonder?
Of most pagodas. It's also the oldest surviving pagoda in Japan. A pagoda is an adaptation
But it says rebuilt, so it's not surviving.
of the traditional stupa, originally a mound containing the Buddha's ashes, but over time became larger and more elaborate. In China, the stupa, combined with the influence of watchtower architecture, evolved into the pagoda. It then spread to Korea and arrived in Japan along with Buddhism in the 6th century. The irregular mountainous topography of these sites forced Japanese architects to rethink temple construction, and they chose more indigenous elements of design. Cypress bark roofs replaced ceramic tiles, wood planks were used instead of earthen floors, and a separate worship area for the laity was added to the front of the main sanctuary. Their use of native materials gives it a more informal appearance, fitting into its environment. Miroji houses several major sculptures, but one of the most impressive from the early Heian period is the seated shaka, carved from a single piece of wood with the exception of the knees and forearms. The sculpture
Again, looking at all this picture, I would have never guessed that it's wood, because obviously they cut it once it's finished with different material. It's really interesting.
is also hollow in the head and chest, but neatly carved pieces of wood fit to cover the whole. Slightly tilted forwards, the sculpture is just barely in balance, creating a tension between the viewer and the image. The almost brooding facial features for a more austere or withdrawn expression, in keeping with the secrecy of the esoteric Buddhist rites. The folds of his clothing are cut in a new way, called rolling wave style or honpa shiki.
Looks nice.
The drapery is thick and sharply undercut at the crest, and the next is a single shallow fold, creating a pattern that contrasts against the smooth surface of the body. The sculpture was painted with gofun or gesso and colored textile designs, but today only a white undercoat and a patch of vermilion remains. I hope you guys enjoyed this part 1.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, I won't lie, I'm definitely not as much into, Buddhist art, I guess, because there's so much of it. And most of the Buddha statue, with some small difference, tend to look the same, right? So, it is interesting how it was made, but in terms of pure look, it does feel a bit redundant because there's so many similar looking Buddha statues. So pretty, next we're gonna talk about some different stuff, let's see. Late Heian period.
This video is part 2 of 2 for art history of the Heian period. If you haven't already watched part 1, please click on the annotation to watch the introduction and early Heian period. This video will cover the mid and late Heian period. Remember how in the Nara period, lands were taken back under direct imperial control and reformed? Well, by the Heian period, land had largely been gifted to these aristocratic clans, particularly to the Fujiwara. The Fujiwara clan, who had taken an active and dominant role in the imperial government, was a powerful political force until the middle of the 12th century. Thus, the Middle Heian period, during which they were at the height of their influence, is often referred to as the Fujiwara period. In 858, the Fujiwara established a new form of government, where they appointed themselves as regents called Sessho and civil dictators called Kanpaku. Through these roles, they ruled in the name of the emperor. By this time, they had intermarried.
Most Japanese don't care the religious value of the old building, but just think they are cool. So we should build that kind of building and make it a site for sightseeing. I mean, I think it's the same for a lot of countries. Like in France, we still have a lot of church. And, I would say France is, for 200-300 years, maybe we kind of fell out of love with religion for the most part. So a lot of old chapels and church, they are basically preserved and maintained, even if, not by religious people, just because, they are cool, right? So I understand that. I mean, you don't have to be religious to care about cool religious building, I think. If it looks cool, it looks cool.
With the Yamato so extensively that the head of the Fujiwara clan was usually the grandfather or uncle and maybe father-in-law of the emperor. What this means is when a Fujiwara consort of the emperor produced an heir apparent, The emperor was encouraged to abdicate, and his Fujiwara father-in-law was named Sessho for the new emperor, and then Kanpaku when the young ruler came of age. Needless to say, they had a lot of control over the government. Powerful clan leaders and Buddhist temples also pressured the emperor to have...
It's basically the golden age of the emperors. I mean, things won't be the same after Yan.
their shoin or estate taxes exempt. The shoin landowners stayed close to the capital, while affairs were increasingly left to local estate managers. Under these managers were peasant farmers who worked their land more or less as bonded serfs. As land holdings were originally imperial gifts and changed hands with intermarriage and inheritance, the Fujiwara carefully maneuvered control over the best sources of revenue at the time. During this time, Japanese culture flourished. It was a largely peaceful time, and the aristocracy had the leisure time and financial means for aesthetic pursuits, such as writing poetry and playing instruments, blending incense, and religious activities like copying Buddhist sutras and putting on elaborate Buddhist ceremonies. These times have been described by the art historian Sir George Sampson as the rule of taste. Previously, due to the strong influence of the Chinese style, Japanese painters copied the tall, rugged mountains of China, despite the fact that Japanese topography was completely different from China's. As the Japanese shifted away from their Chinese models, paintings began to reflect Japan as the Japanese people saw it. The mid-Heian period is seen as the golden age of Yamato-e. They began to distinguish between the Japanese style and the Chinese style, referred to as Kara-e and Yamato-e. Yamato meaning Japan and Kara meaning China. Yamato-e is distinguished by a softer landscape and rich but not brash palette of colors. The landscapes are lower hills with gentle valleys, much like the area around Heian. In contrast, Kara-e images continued in Chinese narrative themes, ferocious mythical creatures, and the landscape of rugged mountains. Etoki is a form of picture telling that developed to explain Buddhist principles. Using an emaki, or hand picture, or a painted hand scroll, or rooms with paintings called a picture hall, a monk would point to a picture and explain the story of either Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, or another important Buddhist monk, most notably Prince Shotoku, who is often attributed to bringing Buddhism to Japan from China. The earliest examples of etoki were performed to small groups of the ruling class upon special request. Later it would move out of picture halls and become more of a public performance. Around 11th century, music would be composed to accompany the stories. Monks often performed etoki in exchange for gifts of money or food. Traveling etoki performing monks would set up and preach on bridges or roadsides for any audience. It was a way to teach the illiterate about religion in an entertaining form of storytelling. The Shotoku Taishi Eden illustrated events of the life.
Do you have Maki roll paper in Europe? Don't think so.
Of Prince Shotoku in a group of
maybe I just don't know.
In a geographic sequence.
I mean, maybe. Like for art, I don't know, but I guess for like old, like manuscript and papers, yeah, maybe. But for art, I don't really know.
Other than a chronological one. Read right to left, each episode is labeled with a cartouche affixed to the painting. The narrative elements are fitted into pockets of open space between the mountains, rocks, and trees, and the vertical composition is held together by the landscape, which flows around the episodes and leads the eye. This use of mountain-defined space to unify a composition while at the same time separating figurative passages is a Chinese pictorial convention seen frequently in the paintings of Tang Dynasty. While using a Chinese pictorial convention, the artist makes sure to make a clear distinction between the landscape of China and Japan. In the two panels of Shinten-noji, it is shown in the lowlands of Naniwa, in what is now called Osaka. On the left side are the mountains of China, tall and irregularly massed together, some of them displaying the sharply undercut faceting frequently seen in Kara-e landscape, but seldom are used in Yamato-e. At the top is a magical flying chariot where Shotoku travels across the sea to China.
Okay, fair enough.
This work is an interesting use of Chinese pictorial convention, but using it to illustrate a secular native theme, the prince's biography, with new elements. In the 10th century, with the rising importance of Pure Land sects of the Japanese Buddhism, the focus of aristocratic worship in the Middle Heian period shifted from Dainichi Norai and the mandalas of Shingon Buddhism to a belief in the rebirth of the Western Paradise, or Pure Land, one of Dainichi's transcendental Buddhas, Amida. New image types were developed to satisfy the devotional needs of these sects. These include the Raigozu, which depict Amida Buddha along with the attendant bodhisattvas, Kennen and Seishi, descending from heaven to welcome the souls of the faithful departed to Amida's Western Paradise. In contrast to the complex and straight disciplines of the rituals of the Shingon school, anyone who sought salvation merely had to repeat the Nembutsu mantra.
I remember we learned about this, and again, I like this. I mean, this one seems maybe like the best form of the early sect of Buddhism in Japan, yeah? Like, you don't have to donate to anybody, you just say something, and it's all good.
Namu Amida Butsu, or Hail to Amida Buddha to be reborn in Amida's paradise. Not bad, huh? Well, a lot of other people thought so too. This teaching didn't just spread through the aristocracy, but Amida was the first sect to extend to the lower ranks of society, aka the vast majority of the population. Prior to this, Buddhism required reading of Chinese text, so common people who didn't possess the skill, pretty much everyone who wasn't an aristocratic male, saw Buddhism simply as magic rituals to prevent calamities, promote a good harvest, and ease the path of their loved ones into the next world, not really reaching nirvana, as you pretty much need to be a monk and dedicate your life to that. Instead, the Nembutsu mantra promised a better afterlife, where even a peasant would live like an aristocrat in Amida's paradise. An irresistible offer at a time when the gap between the aristocrat and commoner was perhaps never bigger. A noted early example of a Raigozu is the Phoenix Hall in the Byodo-in, a temple in Uji, Kyoto. The site was originally a summer home, but was converted into a temple in 1052, and in 1053 the Hodo was dedicated. When looked at across the pool with its reflection in the waters, the building's architecture is basically meant to look like Amida's paradise. When walking into the Hodo, you are surrounded by images of the Raigozu. At the center is an over life-size Amida Buddha on a tall lotus blossom pedestal. On the upper part of the walls are small wooden images of celestial nymphs called tennen, monks, and musicians. The figures on the wall sit or stand on cloud forms, some playing musical instruments or dancing. The Amida image was created by the foremost sculptor of the period, Jocho. Jocho created new proportions for the Amida image, using the height of the head from the chin to the brow as a basic unit for the entire figure. The vertical projection of the statue from the bottom of the legs to the hairline is exactly equal to the distance between the knees. The image gives off a remarkable feeling of stability and calm. The image is sculpted using yoseiji, or multiple blocks, a technique probably developed from the Chinese split and rejoin method of construction. Created with 53 pieces of wood, the multiple block technique did not allow deep carving of the drapery or facial details, but Jocho used this limitation to his advantage, creating a style of sculpture that was light and ethereal rather than heavy and overbearing like the Jinjoji Yakshi. The multiple block technique allowed for more dynamic movement, not really showcased in this particular sculpture, but it also facilitated the production of work in a
they weren't like figurines anyway, like you don't really move this sculpture.
Studio tradition. The master could sketch the image, indicate the joining parts, and the apprentices make the preliminary sculpting for various parts. Then it may be transferred to the site, assembled, and finished by the master sculptor. The figure is accompanied by an open-work gold halo that meets a round canopy at the top. The detail of the work contrasts with the smooth surface of the Amida, underlining the calm, quiet demeanor of the image itself. In the late Heian period, the imperial clan began to actively wrest control of the government from the Fujiwara to rebuild its own financial strength. Emperor Go-Sanjo was the first emperor in many
Fujiwara
decades
did
to
too
be
much.
born of a non-Fujiwara mother, so he was able to resist many of the Fujiwara demands. He established a concept called insei, or government by cloistered retired emperors.
Oh yeah, this is the start of the retired stuff.
His idea was this. He would abdicate the throne and become a monk at a Buddhist temple he founded. He would continue to govern the country through his son, the reigning emperor, but since he would no longer be holding an official position, he could receive donations of the land. This way, they would collect the income generated through these lands, as well as from the intermediary of temples that he and his family had founded. However, Emperor Go-Sanjo died shortly after abdicating the throne and was never able to put his plan to action. Instead, his son Shirakawa followed his lead with great success. Along with his son Toba,
Shirakawa was something.
the period of these two's rule outrivaled the opulence of even the most powerful Fujiwara members. The chief focus of the imperial family, as you can guess, was on the founding of Yamato clan temples. Between the late 11th and middle of the 12th century, the retired emperor and his kin and loyal subjects dedicated a new Shinto worship hall every year and founded a Buddhist temple every 5 years. Unfortunately, none of the temples built for Shirakawa or Toba or their relatives and devoted subjects have survived.
That's so many
the
temples.
Sanju Sangendo is perhaps most impressive for housing 1,001 images of the 11-headed, 1,000-armed Senju Kennen. The
That's
original
so many.
hall was destroyed in a fire, but rebuilding began immediately to house the images that were saved from the fire. The simplicity of the architecture with exposed beams contrasts with the complicated details of the myriad of Kennen images and the statues of Kennen's attendants. 156 Kennen sculptures were saved, and they form the nucleus of the Sanju Sangendo installation. They're mostly in a frontal position with the largest pair of arms pressed together in prayer. Another set of arms rests just below the waist, and a third pair holds a monk's staff and a trident-topped staff, a symbol of the defense against evil. The rest of the arms are separate, some holding more objects. The skirts and scarves are formed with shallow carving and fall in soft folds over the body. The later 13th century editions are...
And imagine everything you could do if you had like 10 little arms behind you like this, huh? Doing many things at the same time. I guess you need, a bigger brain for all that, but...
attributed to Tankei. They have heavier drapery folds over the legs, and patterns created by the garments flow over the entire area between the waist and feet. There's also a greater gradation of the size of arms, demonstrating the new interest in volumetric figures being realistically presented, which developed during the Kamakura period. At the same time, they maintain a fidelity to older forms for a uniform look. Upon encountering the images, one is faced with a sea of figures too fast to comprehend from a single view. A great deal of time and money were devoted to secular projects as well. There are two distinct painting styles of emaki, referred to as otoko-e, men's pictures, and ona-e, or women's pictures. While otoko-e
I think I like the onai.
came to refer to the monochrome or lightly colored pictures that relied on the Chinese style of calligraphic line to convey visual image, ona-e was a reaction to this genre and leaned towards more Yamato-e style of painting. The Genji Monogatari Emaki, an example of ona-e, would have been an ambitious project, completed by 5 teams, each team including an aristocrat noted for his calligraphy and cultural sophistication, the principal artist called sumigaki, or painter who draws in the black ink, and artists who specialized in the application of traditional pigments. It's suspected that all 54 chapters of Genji Monogatari were illustrated with 1 to 3 paintings per chapter in a set of 10 scrolls. Today,
I guess Genji Monogatari is very, very important. Let me just write it down as something we should check out eventually in some way. I don't know if there's any retelling on YouTube. There's a movie of it. Interesting. And it's on YouTube.
only 20 pictures survive. The sumigaki would plan the composition and sketch it on paper in fine black ink lines. At the same time, he would make notes on the sheet about colors he wanted, and then the pigment specialist would apply each layer of paint within but obscuring the original lines. In the final stage, the sumigaki would review the illustration, perhaps changing a few details, and paint in the face details.
It looks nice. I think the thing I like the most about it is, seeing the amount of colors in the outfits from back then. I mean, some of those, they look as colorful as like a cougar outfit or something, with like a print pattern.
This painting technique of applying layers of paint over an underdrawing is called tsukuri-e, meaning made up or construction. A major theme of Genji Monogatari
Never read Genji Monogatari? It's about a love triangle.
was the concept of mono no aware.
I guess some things never change. Love triangle stories are still as popular as ever.
Translated as the pathos of things or the moving quality of experience. It's an awareness of the impermanence or the transience of things which heightens the appreciation of their beauty and evokes a gentle sadness at their passing. The illustrations use pictorial conventions to help illustrate these moments of high emotional intensity. The fukinuki yatai, or blown-off roof and odd angle of perspective, not only seamlessly depicts indoor and outdoor activities, but also provides a better view of the space, much like a rake or inclined stage. The presence or absence of space in which the figures could move also contributes insight into their feelings. Colors and patterns heighten the mood of the scene. All elements come together to create for a strong impression of mono no aware. A second major theme is the chain of karmic consequences Genji generated when he committed one great sin against his father. In his youth, he fell in love with his father's youngest wife. A child was born from their liaison.
Damn. I guess Netorare was popular even back then. Huh? That's crazy. Like, this is literally the plot of a doujin. And yet, this is from like so long ago, 900 years ago or something. Wow.
And the baby boy was passed off as the emperor's own son. In other words, Genji's son became Genji's brother. When Genji is in middle age, his youngest wife has an extramarital...
Probably, I mean, like, I'm sure there was, right? Because it happens in real life a lot, especially in high societies, so I'm sure there were stories about it. I can't really tell you any stories because I don't know.
Affair that results in a son that Genji decides he must publicly accept as his own, just as the old emperor had done with Genji's son. The illustration of this scene would have been unveiled from right to left as the image is rolled open. First you see the empty courtyard, originally painted silver but now...
So I always wondered about this. Obviously, the writing system inherited from China was already right to left, and that's how manga became right to left. And I guess even the art back then, the scroll art was right to left. Interesting. I always tell the story, but the very first time I read a manga, when I was a kid, I had a birthday, and I had invited some people I didn't know, and one of them gave me a volume of Dragon Ball. It wasn't even the first one or something, and I tried reading it, but I was reading it from left to right, like you do with, Western writing. So it made zero sense because obviously, like, I read from the ending to the beginning, but I was reading it and I was like, I just don't understand this Japanese mango. And it's only like later that I realized. And if you buy a lot of like manga in France, these days at least, and in the last 10 years, if you open it, it will literally say on the first page, like, or sometimes even in the back, manga are supposed to be read from like right to left, because most people don't know. Yeah, you just don't know.
Now tarnished, the veranda, placed at a sharp angle, almost keeps us out. With a peak of the edge of a 12-layered robe, we tread carefully through the curtains into the room. You get the sense of entering a very private space and moment. The sharp angle and the edge of the painting makes the room very small, almost claustrophobic. The red lacquered plates filled with food indicate that a ceremony is in place. Genji is at the top holding a baby, while ladies in waiting are below. At the extreme upper left corner is the baby's mother, her presence depicted by a mound of fabric. Genji, uncomfortable with the ritual, aware that the attendants know that the baby is not his, is also physically awkward, jammed into this constricted corner of the image. Like the pressure of society forcing him to put on a good face in a bad situation, the architecture forces Genji into a cramped position. In the Minori or the Rights chapter, Genji's true love, Lady Murasaki, is dying. Genji's daughter by another wife, who Lady Murasaki raised as her own, comes from the imperial palace to be with her. One stormy evening, Genji visits Murasaki and the three sit together, watching the wind whip the shrubs and grasses in the garden. When Genji first built his mansion, he planted his garden to be beautiful year-round, reaching peak in the springtime, Murasaki's favorite season. Now as they gaze at it, it seems to be nothing but a tangled mess of vines. Again, the architecture plays an important role. As Genji knows Murasaki is gravely ill, he dreads that she will die and senses that his grief will be nearly too much to bear. The angles are just as steep as the previous image, but unlike that one, the figures appear almost immediately as the scroll is unrolled. Murasaki is near the top, leaning on an armrest. Her adopted daughter is just below the angle formed by the upper beam of the wall and the cloth curtain of state. Genji appears at the bottom of the incline, nearest to the veranda. Lastly, as the architecture disappears, it leads to the wind-ravaged garden. His anguish over Murasaki as she drifts towards death is suggested by the space he occupies, between the imminent death and the tangled shrubbery in the cold. The Shigi-san Engi-amaki, translated to the scroll of the Legend of Mount Shigi, is one of the earliest examples of a type of narrative that became very popular in the late Heian and Kamakura periods. The Engi is the history of the founding of a particular Buddhist establishment. This one is about a temple called Chogo Son Shiji, deep in the mountains north of Nara, and the magical tales of its founder, a monk called...
You get to thumbnails, some people write vertical Japanese, left to right, and people say you're stupid. Okay. I wonder why.
Myorin. The first two scrolls depict the miracles Myorin wrought, chastised.
Japanese thumbnails though are very different, I've noticed. Like there's so much text in the thumbnail, right? That's a big difference from like Western thumbnail who try to have little text, right? But in Japan, it's like most of the thumbnail is just text. Yeah.
A wealthy and greedy farmer by making his granary fly through the air to the top of the mountain. Then he heals Emperor Daigo when all other attempts had failed, causing a rare Buddhist entity, a sword boy, to appear to the emperor.
Sword boy?
The text serves as a legitimization of the temple, indicating that worshippers there would benefit from the magical powers of its founder. This engi is in the Otoko-e style, made first by painting the outlines of the figures and the natural scenery in dark gray brushstrokes. For colors, he used thin pigments that would not obscure his earlier lines. This allowed him to depict figures in active stances and utilize the calligraphic strokes to suggest movement. This gives the illustration a lively, fresh
kanji is obviously faster,
quality in perfect harmony with its subject matter. Another major amaki surviving in the late Heian period is the Bandai novel.
That's one of the reasons, like, it's probably very hard for anyone who's trying to translate a manga, right, into the alphabet, because, like you have the small speech bubble, right, but if it's only a few kanji, it fits, but then if you're trying to translate it to English or French or something, and you still have to only put your sentence inside the bubble, it becomes kind of hard because, again, like, in alphabet, words are very long, and so a few kanji versus, like, many words in alphabet, it becomes complicated. I imagine, like, translating manga must be a lot of work. Yeah. Always respect for people who do it.
Gon Ekotoba. Attributed to Tokiwa no Mitsunaga, it tells the story of the Oten Gate of the imperial palace burning down in 866. It was later proved that the fire was set by the head of the Otomo clan in an attempt to discredit a court rival, the minister of the left, Minamoto no Makoto. Found guilty, Lord Otomo was sent into exile. An excellent example of...
They were so nice at this time again, like, Heian period was really not bad, Like, someone does something like this 200 years later, harakiri, seppuku, and you know, your head is cut off. English always say I, and French say je. Don't know, one would never think it's about someone else. I mean, I don't really have an explanation about all that. I do understand that in Japanese, you know who you're talking about because of context. So there's no like masculine and feminine or I. I understand that, but I can't really tell you why and which one is better. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think it really depends on like the context of a sentence. Like, I don't know, let me comment with something. I mean, I really don't know how to explain it because to me it feels like so normal because I'm used to it, yeah? Yeah. Subaru for I. Yeah, I'm not into language enough to explain the logic of all this. It's too complicated for me.
Narrative painting, this image illustrated the surprising way that the truth comes out with amazing economy of space. Rather than each scene having its own panel, the events unfold right next to each other. The story goes something like this. One day in the market district, two boys begin to fight. One boy's father, a retainer of Lord Otomo, rushes out to break them apart. Underneath this, illustrations show how the father beats the other child severely. The second boy's father, a low-ranking government worker, rages at the first boy's father for hurting his son. Beside himself with anger, the second child's father blurts out that if the world knew what he knows about the retainer and the master Lord Otomo, they would be severely punished. Heard by everyone in the neighborhood, the threat was discussed in whispers until it finally came to the attention of the Metropolitan Police. The second father tells the authorities that he saw the retainer and Lord Otomo climb down from the palace gate just before it burst into flames. While the conversation between the fathers isn't shown, there are people grimacing as he beats the child. The figure with his mouth open shows how the rumor spreads by word of mouth, passing from person to person. The Yamaki is an interesting blend of the Sukuri-e seen in the Genji Monogatari Yamaki and the free Otoko-e style of the Shigi-san Engi Yamaki.
VTubers say their name for I to make people remember their name, but some people make an accident saying their real name instead. I haven't really seen that happen too much, yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, like Japanese at first seems more simple in terms of like how you address yourself. I mean, again, I understand that in Japanese, when you're talking about someone, you understand that by what's being talked about, you know, you don't really say like masculine or feminine. But then, yeah, if you look at VTubers or anime characters, there's a lot of like very unique way of actually, you know, addressing yourself, like, you know, like oira, boku, ateshi. There's still like a lot of way to do it, but I guess it's not really like a normal way. It's more like a anime way. I assume in real life people don't really talk that much. I understand that, yeah, but it is interesting. In the end, I feel like, you know, like all of that, oira, ateshi, boku, etc. You know, is kind of the same as je or I, yeah. It kind of is.
The artist uses an elegant and controlled calligraphic line to sketch out his figures, but also thickly applies bright colors. The unidealized human behavior central to both the Shigi-san Engi and the Bandai Nagon demonstrates perhaps a new awareness and interest outside of the aristocratic circle. By the end of the Heian period, the cloistered world of the court was beginning to collapse, and perhaps these works, at least on the part of some of the aristocracy, were an attempt to break through the bars of their gilded cage. After Toba's death in 1156, disputes over succession between the Imperial Yamato and the Fujiwara clans resulted in two rebellions, the Hogen in 1156 and the Heiji or the Heikei in 1160. The two opposing clans sought help from the military clans, the Taira and the Minamoto.
Yeah, bye.
Disputes concluded with the Genpei Civil War, which lasted from 1180 to 1185. The war was fought throughout the country, but ended with an epic sea battle that almost completely wiped out the Taira clan, and the women of the Taira clan leapt to their watery graves, clutching the infant Emperor Antoku.
That was really sad, yeah. Yeah. And Yoshitsune died. Or maybe not. Maybe he actually went to Hokkaido, and maybe he became Genghis Khan. As we had learned last time, there was a rumor or something.
So traumatic was this loss that there's even ghost stories about their death. You can check it out over here. The victorious Minamoto...
Oh, you know what? That's actually an idea for a stream. Japanese yokai and ghost story learning. Japanese yokai. We might do that in some other stream.
established a new form of military dictatorship, the Bakufu, in which the military clan oversaw the governing of the nation until 1868 and the imperial restoration. And we'll cover that in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.
Okay, well, the Genji Monogatari seems very interesting. Again, I don't know if I'm gonna do any stream about it, but maybe I'll watch that anime movie by myself or something. I kind of want to know. It seems like the first like big hit story of like early Japan, and it's a Netodare story. Overall thing, amazing. A favorite yokai? Oh, I don't know. I think I kind of like the. I was gonna say I kind of like the scary woman one, like Kuchisake Onna. Because then there's like, you know, romance manga about it, where like she's scary but actually no, it's a romance. I kind of like that. Otherwise, I don't know. Tengu are pretty cool. There's something about Tengu I kind of like. You know, because they're kind of like human but not really human, and I don't know, they're kind of cool, Tengu. Okay, the next episode is a ghost story, but I guess we'll pass that one. And next we go to the Kamakura period. Buddha.
Hey everyone, so today we're in Kamakura visiting the Daibutsu, which is this giant Buddha statue behind me. It's really crowded today, so it's kind of loud. I'm going to a quieter...
AC1, no. Unfortunately, this channel only goes up to Azuchi Momoyama period, so I don't have any video after that. But I'm sure eventually we can watch something like this. Like, eventually I want to do a stream where we learn the entire history of manga and anime, maybe. So I guess it will cover like Showa and, you know, Issei, I guess. But I have to find the videos for that. That's always the thing. Yeah.
Place. Is that a little better? While the Heian era was a time of peace and tranquility, the Kamakura and Muromachi periods were times of war and power struggles. Power shifted from the nobility to the warrior class, and artisans had a new class to cater to, one that had distinct aesthetic taste and interest from the nobility. Let's take a look at the history of the Kamakura period and its art history. After centuries-long power struggle between the imperial house and the powerful Fujiwara clan, control over the government shifted away from both of them. The war turned into a fight between the two most powerful warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. First, let's talk about who these warrior clans are.
Okay, I guess we'll pass this part since we've already learned about that pretty extensively from the Biyuden channel. We'll go to the part where they talk about the art.
The seat won in war, and throughout military and lacquer craftsmen made great strides during these periods. As you can imagine, there was ample patronage from the newly wealthy samurai class. In the Heian period, arms and armors were divided between those made for aristocratic patrons, meant for court ceremonies, and those made for the battlefield. This means that ones that were pretty were not necessarily functional. Once power shifted to the samurai, there was a greater effort on combining both approaches so that the strong and deadly weapons were also aesthetically beautiful, both elegant and durable. Suits of armor were more opulent and luxurious, but also of what was then considered a deeply masculine aesthetic. The majority of samurai armor is made out of densely woven lacquered iron and leather, while the decorative areas are made out of silk, gilt copper, and doeskin. The breastplate of this suit is decorated with a colored image of Fudo, the immovable, a ferocious-looking deity whose menacing glare subdues evil and frightens unbelievers.
Feels like a shame to wear your art like this, because if it gets sliced, I mean, it's destroyed, you know?
While emaki, or painted scrolls, continued to be produced during the Kamakura period, this period is much more strongly characterized by sculpture, regarded as the Renaissance era of Japanese sculpture. The Kei School of Sculptors, based in Nara, was perfectly positioned to carry out the rebuilding and restoration of sculptures of temples affected by war. The school itself is a legacy of Heian sculptor Jo Cho, and they created a new, more realistic style of sculpture. Important figures include Koukei and his sons Enkei and Kaikei. By the way, these studios are often a family affair, hence the K names. And they're responsible for some of the most innovative and accomplished works of the Kamakura. Succeeding the Yosegi Zukuri, or multiple block technique, they studied early Nara period masterpieces and Chinese Song Dynasty sculptures and paintings, reviving qualities such as representation of sentiment, solidity, and movement. Their choice of medium was wood and bronze, so what wasn't revived were clay, dry lacquer, embossing, and terracotta sculptures. In the first years after the Genpei Civil War, one of the top priorities was renewal. They wanted to revitalize the nation's traditional religious foundations, rebuild Buddhist temples damaged or destroyed during the wars, and update existing religious institutions to satisfy the newly emerging needs and tastes. One of the highest priorities was rebuilding the highly revered ancient temple, Todaiji, in Nara. The priest placed in charge of the rebuilding efforts was Sunjobo Shogen. Having visited China 3 times to further his Buddhist training, he had learned contemporary Chinese Buddhist architecture, which influenced the rebuilding aesthetic called Daibutsujo, or Great Buddha style. This portrait sculpture of Chogen shows the starkly realistic style of this period. Probably made shortly after his death in 1206, it would have been used for memorial services in his honor. It shows him as an old man sitting in a slightly hunched forward position, reciting the Nembutsu mantra. He keeps count of his recital with the prayer beads of his rosary. Made of hinoki, or Japanese,
like the detail on the face is really something.
Cypress in the multiple block technique, it is decorated simply with paint, flesh tones for the skin, and black for the robe. The sculpture paid close attention to the details of the face, with prominent cheekbones, wrinkled flesh, pursed lips, and deep eye cavities under the bony eyebrows. This is an image of an old priest who is physically and emotionally tough and wholeheartedly committed to his religious vocation. Todaiji is also home to one of the most famous works of Enkei and Kaikei during this time, which is a colossal pair of Kongo Rikshi. The 2 Neo-Guardian images which flank the sides of the Nandaimon, or Great South Gate, are a great example of the dynamic, realistic style of this period. Around 8 meters or 26 feet tall, they are carved from multiple blocks and took about 3 months to create, indicative of the sophisticated studio system of artisans who worked under the direction of a master sculptor. These figures, called the Neo-Guardians, protect the entrance gates at temples. Agyo with his mouth open on the right, and Eungyo with his mouth closed on the left. They are said to represent life and death, and the beginning and the end. Their fierce and threatening appearances ward off evil spirits, keeping the temple grounds free of demons and thieves. The two guardians stand in a dramatic hip-slung pose, giving the impression of arrested motion. Raising their arm in a strong protective gesture, their scarves and skirts are swept to one side. The carving strongly emphasizes the three-dimensional features and sense of movement. Their knowledge of 8th century Nara sculpture was used to rework a new style appropriate for the times. The realism emphasized to a point of exaggeration heightens the sense of drama. An example of Unkei's mature style can be found in the Hokuendo, or North Octagonal Hall, of the Kofukuji temple complex. At the center is Miraku Bushi, or Future Buddha, who was originally attended by 2 bodhisattvas, the Shitenno, or the 4 guardian kings, and 2 Indian rakan. Of these, only Miraku and the 2 rakan have survived. Miraku sits cross-legged on a tall octagonal platform with an elaborate open-work halo behind his head. The sculpture represents the mature Buddha of the future, and Unkei has achieved a new balance of proportion, similar to how Jocho created new proportions for Amida Norai in the Byodoin during the Heian period. This figure doesn't appear to be top-heavy. The facial features and drapery are more deeply carved, giving it a more natural look. The eyeballs are made of an inset crystal, a practice which became common in the late 12th century. The pupils seem to be focused downward, suggesting an expression of melancholy. The style is more approachable, a gentle, almost human-looking deity with whom the worshipper can hope to communicate. In Buddhism, the rakan, also known as arhats, have not yet achieved complete enlightenment, but are far along the path to it, already free from rebirth. The brothers Muchaku and Seishin are depicted. Muchaku is depicted as a more slender figure than his brother and holds a cylindrical object, perhaps a reliquary wrapped in a piece of cloth. Seishin's hands appear to be gesturing as he speaks.
I think the most impressive thing is really like the facial expression that feels so realistic. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, the level of mastery of expression.
Muchaku appears more reflective and introverted, while the other is outgoing, seeming to make eye contact with the viewer. Both wear priests' robes that fall in deeply carved and irregularly patterned folds.
I think arts in China and Korean may be more developed and want to see how they were. I mean, China definitely, since China, has like so much more people and, had so much more dynasty, even before Japan had the first government, I guess. So it makes sense, yeah. It makes sense. I mean, yeah. Korea, I don't know too much.
They appear completely natural, freestanding and not frontally posed. A particularly striking image is one by Unkei's son, Kosho. This image is of Kuya, a priest who traveled through the island of Honshu to spread the message of Amida Buddhism. He converted to Amidism after he killed a deer and then realized the enormity of his act. He proceeded to teach the Nembutsu mantra at each village and town with a ritual of worship that included chanting the mantra while dancing to gongs and bells. An antler is affixed to his walking staff, serving as a reminder to the reason he became a priest. Kosho's statue shows the man in a walking stance with a gong held to his chest by a yoke over his shoulders. Attached to a wire coming out of the priest's mouth are 6 standing Amida Buddha figures, symbolizing the 6 syllables of the mantra, portraying his dedication and faith. After the Genpei War, priest Myoe Shonin sought to revive the Keigon sect, one of the important sects during the Nara period, but struggled while Pure Land sects became more popular. As a son of a Fujiwara mother and a Taira adopted father, he was orphaned at the beginning of the Genpei Civil War. He was adopted a year later by his uncle, who was a monk at Jingoji. Myoe was a bit of a recluse.
Like a magic releasing country flag out of his mouth.
Uninterested in the
I
rebuilding
see what you mean,
projects,
yeah.
and instead turned his attention to forming a new Buddhist doctrine based on a combination of elements in the Shingon and Kegon. The Kegon and Gyamaki consisted of two narrative scrolls. It depicts the life of two Korean monks, Uisang and Wuhyo, their Japanese names being Gisho and Gangyo respectively. They are the two founders of the Korean Kegon school, from which Japanese Kegon Buddhism is derived. The story begins with the two monks leaving the Korean kingdom Silla, intending to travel to China together. The two spend their first night in a burial cave, taking shelter from the rain. Gangyo decides to look within himself to decide the best course of action. After seeing a gruesome single-horned demon, he decides to abandon his plans for travel. Gisho, however, continues on to China and has a bunch of adventures. Just before he returns to Korea, he meets the beautiful Zemyo, who falls in love with him. Being devoted to Dharma, he ignores her attentions, and she is forced to accept her beloved's religious dedication. When he returns to his homeland, she throws herself into the ocean and protects his ship as a dragon. Yep,
what?
You heard right, she turned into a dragon. Bet you can't say you've done that for love.
Okay.
This scroll is an excellent example of the popularizing trend seen during the Kamakura period.
Kind of crazy story, but kind of fun.
It is created for a wider range of people, perhaps even catering to a more female audience, suggested by the limited use of Chinese characters, which women were discouraged from learning, and the emphasis on Zemyo as a protector. This story reads like an epic novel filled with a long journey and poignant love story, and the speech written right next to the characters is comparable to a contemporary comic strip. While the Heian aristocracy were successfully pushed aside by the new government, that isn't to say there wasn't anyone missing the good old days. Murasaki Shikibu's Genji Monogatari continued to be read, and a new set of the Genji Monogatari Emaki were produced. There was also a greater interest in Murasaki Shikibu herself. The nobility, nostalgic for the past days of wealth and power, revived and illustrated her diary in order to recapture the splendor of the author's times.
That's cool.
The diary consists of anecdotes from her time as a lady-in-waiting in the imperial court of Kyoto. Events include celebrations surrounding the birth of Prince Atsuhira, but despite the gaiety and splendor of such events, Murasaki often reveals her dissatisfaction with court life. Scenes are filled with a sense of the fleeting nature of joy and pleasure. Oftentimes it reflects the author's feelings of loneliness and being subjected to the will of people who outrank her. On one occasion, two drunken couriers attempt to come into her room as she holds her windows shut against them. While pictorial compositions are similar to those of Heian period illustrations of Genji Monogatari,
it's really interesting how this shows what's much more common today, but that was very early back then. Like someone writes a story, people really like the story, and eventually they want to know more about the person, and so they start reading stuff like a diary, and it's really like a fan culture. Yeah.
The effects in the 13th century scroll is entirely different. While the Heian period illustrations expressed character emotions through landscape, here the figures instead express themselves directly, and the landscape becomes a pictorial element to be appreciated apart from the events in the narrative. Like the Heian period scrolls, the work is made with the Sukuri-e technique, but without the same care. Silver is used less frequently, and less attention has been given to the interior architectural details,
Still looks
such
nice.
as designs on the sliding doors. Amida Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, grew in popularity since the Middle Heian period. However, surrounded by the devastation during times of war, people perceived themselves to be living in the time of Mappo. According to the Buddhist tradition, at the end of the age of the present Buddha, Shaka, it is the time of Mappo, a degenerate period.
I know things weren't great at this time. There was famine, natural disaster, and the government not being great, and the common people suffering a lot. But it really wasn't Mappo. I mean, Mappo was either the Sengoku Jidai, for most, or around like World War II, yeah. Mapo was probably not this time.
Of 10,000 years distinguished by conflict, cruelty, and despair. In the Mapo phrase, evil is so pervasive that conventional strategies for attaining nirvana, such as reading and copying sutras and meditation, would be of no avail. Pure Land Buddhism, on the other hand, provided a sure path to salvation for the men and women who found little solace from other Buddhist schools. It is centered on the belief that salvation, or rebirth in Amida's paradise, could be achieved through faith in Amida Buddha and the practice of the Nembutsu mantra. The two types of Pure Land devotional paintings, mandalas and Raigo paintings, took on a renewed importance. Their imagery focuses on the depiction of Amida's Western paradise, and the contemplation of these paintings is intended to aid the practitioner in visualizing the promised land. The Taima mandala is one of the earliest of which is preserved in a tapestry version in the Taima Dera. The temple is in the village of Taima in the Nara prefecture. It is estimated to have been made in the later half of the Nara period and an import from China. There are no references to it in the Nara or Heian period documents, but it was rediscovered in the 13th century and became the prototype for a series of mandala paintings of Amida Western Paradise. So popular it was to copy this original that I could only find this one detail photo of the original, but plenty of copies, such as this one executed in rich colors, gold and silver. The central element of the mandala is an image of the Court of Essential Doctrine depicting Amida's paradise. The Buddha is seated on a high octagonal throne, flanked by the Bodhisattvas Kannon and Seishi, who occupy lower lotus blossom thrones. Numerous smaller bodhisattvas and deities wearing skirts, scars, and crowns surround the triad. Behind this are multi-storied palaces, and in front of them is a large lotus pond, out of which the souls of the blessed will be reborn into the paradise on lotus blooms. Boats are pulled between the blossoms to collect the small children and other human figures who represent the reborn souls. Along the sides and the bottoms of the paintings are images of the Sutra of Meditation of the Buddha and Infinite Life. On the left is the Court of the Prefectory legend, in which a wicked crown prince imprisoned his father to be starved to death. However, the old king's principal wife and prince's mother, Ideiki, brought him food to keep him alive. When the prince found out, he imprisoned his mother as well. She prays to Shaka for deliverance, and the Buddha is so moved by her plight that he appears before her and shows her the paradises of the 10 directions, from which she chooses the Western paradise of Amida. On the right is the mandala of the Court of the 13 meditational concentrations, detailing the various wonders of...
So this reminds me of at the end of Princess Kaguya, they're coming down to take Kaguya back to the moon on this kind of cloud thing, I guess.
The Western Paradise, which Ideiki must visualize to attain rebirth there. On the bottom band are meditations on the 3 levels of rebirth in the Western Paradise, and each of these 3 levels are subdivided into 3 degrees. Thus, along the bottom are representations of the 9 different types of Raigo. 2 types of Raigo painting developed in the late 12th and 13th century. One is the Haya, or swift Raigo, in which Amida and his host of bodhisattvas descend to earth in the twinkling of an eye. The other is Yamagoshi, or the mountain crossing Raigo, in which only 3 figures, Amida, Kannon, and Seishi, are depicted above a range of mountains, which they must cross to complete their descent on Earth. A classic example of the Haya Raigo is the hanging scroll in
sliding down.
Entering the image at a diagonal from the left, Amida and his host of attendants descend from the heavens on wisps of clouds. The procession is led by Kannon, who is kneeling towards the deceased man. The man, dressed in a monk's robe, sits behind a low table. In the lower left corner of the painting are green mountains dotted with pines and flowering cherry trees, and in the upper right there is a glimpse of a tiny building, suggesting Amida's many-storied palace in the Western Paradise. A famous Yamagoshi raigo is the painting in Zenrinji. The golden head and torso of Amida can be seen glowing against a dark sky, his halo suggesting the moon. Below him to the right and left are Kennen and Sheishi, who have already crossed the mountain and are bending forward to greet the deceased. The lower center of the painting can be seen as the blue water of a river, and opposite each other on its banks, two boys are pointing up at the divinities. To the right and left, at the sides of the painting, the Shintenno, or four heavenly kings, are grouped in pairs. Finally, in the left corner is the Sanskrit character for the first syllable of Amida's name. The mountains are dotted with small trees of orange and red leaves of the fall. Now you may have noticed that I haven't said much about Shinto art. In fact,
I was wondering what that, yeah, like, was Shinto so small that there's just not much to talk about? It's definitely, like, even to this era, things is heavily dominated by Buddhism art, I guess.
I've only mentioned Shinto architecture thus far. Prior to the second half of the Nara period, kami imagery belonged to an aniconic tradition. Aniconism, meaning without idols or images, usually had a symbolic or suggestive rather than literal representation. For example, something like a mirror can stand in for the presence of a deity rather than giving a deity a human form. During the Nara period, there were efforts to create a harmonious relationship between Japan's ancestral and natural kami and the new teachings of Buddhism and its pantheon of celestial entities. In the mid-8th century, the sun goddess Amaterasu was consulted via her shrine at Ise, and her response was that she and Birushana were simply emanations of one another, creating a process for the two systems to meld during the Heian and Kamakura period. With a strong tradition of Buddhist sculpture during the Heian period, it became common to give kami a human form in the style of Buddhist entities. These three small wooden sculptures are of a Yasumi Gaoka triad, a monk flanked by two female figures in court costume. Carved out of a single block of wood, it is simple but elegant, an aesthetic that would be maintained among Shinto sculptural imagery over the centuries. Architecture of Shinto shrines also changed during this time. The simple fencing of the Ise and Izumo shrines were replaced by roofed and corridors of cloistered walls, in addition to numerous subsidiary buildings for monks and treasuries. Many summer festivals, such as the Gion, were to propitiate Shinto kami in the hopes that they would save the population from pestilence, earthquake, and warfare. While shrines associated with imperial cults declined from the 14th to 16th centuries, other kami cults, particularly ones that protected communities or had some influence over natural events, received great reverence from the common man, as that given to Pure Land Buddhism. Kitano Tenjin was an entirely new kami created during the Heian period, who continued to grow in popularity among those at court, the samurai, and the populace. The Kitano Tenjin Engiyamaki is a scroll that tells the story behind the founding of his Kitano shrine in Kyoto. Sugawara no Michizane was a leading poet and scholar of the Chinese language, but he was exiled through the plotting of the Fujiwara and died in disgrace. According to the beliefs at the time, the soul of a person who died falsely accused becomes an angry spirit or onro, causing deaths and accidents in their revenge.
So that's where the concept comes from, huh? Interesting. It's still a pretty big concept today, right? Yeah.
To appease his spirit in 923, he was posthumously appointed Minister of the Right, but it was believed that his spirit took the form of the god of thunder. In 947, a shrine, Kitano Tenmanju, was built in Kyoto in his honor. Finally, he was accorded the designation of Tenjin, or heavenly deity, and became regarded as the patron god of learning, literature, and calligraphy. Today, students facing an important examination visits a Kitano shrine and prays to Michizane. During the Kamakura period, mandala paintings of Shinto shrines also became popular. The most typical of Shinto mandala images is that of the Kasuga Shrine, which is the family shrine of the Fujiwara. The Kasuga deer mandala features a large white deer manifested on a cloud above the torii gate to the compound of the Kasuga Shrine. From its saddle rises the branch of a sakaki tree, which is framed behind the image of a mirror. Standing on each branch are the 5 Kasuga kami, depicted in their Buddhist forms as Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The mirror is a reference to Amaterasu, who is coaxed out of her cave with a mirror. The deer is often considered sacred within Japan. From a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha gave his first sermon in a deer park in northern India. However, the deer was considered sacred even before the arrival of Buddhism in Japan. Thanks so much for watching this video.
Okay, well, once again it was a lot of Buddhist stuff, I won't lie. I feel like the Imaki story are a bit more what I'm interested in, but I do lose a bit of interest with all the more Buddhism stuff. Not saying that in a disrespectful way, in a more like, you know, obviously I'm not into religion myself, and I feel like a lot of the stuff, a lot of the art and the sculpture, of Buddhism at the time feel very similar, right? Even with the story of it, you know, it all feels very similar, and yeah, it's losing me a little bit. Yeah, I can't lie. Next we have the Japanese L School.
A type of painting that emerged in the years after the Genpei Civil War is called roku.
See, this right away seems more interesting.
I gotta say, these are kind of my favorite. They are grotesque or shocking pictures of the 6 types of
like, look at this freaking thing, like the super, like, almost pregnant belly, but then the rest of the body is like skin and bones, right? It's one love a visual.
Existence into which human beings might be reborn if unable to achieve salvation. And well, if you're not going to heaven, you're going to hell, right? While the aristocracy of the mid-Heian would never consider themselves to be born anywhere besides Amida's paradise, in the less optimistic climate of the medieval period, these scrolls reminded people of the suffering that might lay ahead, so you better do all you can to avoid it. One of the best known illustrations of the 6 realms is a set of 15 hanging scrolls owned by Shoju Raigoji. It's a little bit hard to see in the photo of the original painting, so here's a 19th century copy. The rectangles at the top of each painting contains excerpts explaining the scenes depicted. The decaying bodies are particularly graphic. In this painting, a newly deceased woman has been laid out on a straw mat. Still wearing a white garment, her hair is unkept. On the left, under a blossoming tree, she is shown again, but this time her garment has fallen away and the belly is swollen with gases of decay. Under
Oh, that's what it is, not about pregnancy then.
a layer of mist, sheltered under a maple tree and autumn leaf, the same female body is shown in 2 further stages
I guess it's like the earliest Guru art.
of decomposition. Finally, at the bottom, 3 more female corpses can be seen. One, a fresh body being picked at by blackbirds and various other wild animals, and the other 2 are skeletons. While this scroll has a strong Yamato-e flavor, especially in the treatment of the landscape, others among the set display a more Kara-e or Chinese style of ink painting. These paintings were also made in smaller hand scrolls for a more intimate viewing. The Nara National Museum's Jikoku Soshi, or Hell Scrolls, depicts 7 of the 16 lesser hells and describes what kind of hell each particular sinner will end up in. The 7 hells depicted are the hell of excrement, hell of measures, hell of the iron mortar, hell of the flaming rooster, hell of the black sand cloud, hell of pus and blood, and the hell of foxes and wolves. Man, these hells are good. Like, who got to come up with these? There's even a flaming cock. What? That's how it's translated.
I mean, yeah, it's always funny.
The Hell of Measures is a hell just for those people who cheat their customers by short waiting. In it, they are forced to pick metal boxes with hot coals from a fire and judge their weight. They are overseen by a frightening, 3-eyed, white-haired old croon. The atmosphere in this hell is dark and smoky. The only
maybe something is wrong with me, but again, I love this kind of art so much more than some of the more peaceful Buddha one, right? Something is definitely wrong with me, but it's just much more interesting in concept.
Real light being provided by the fire in the
I am
center.
a G.
The supervisor is a looming presence, her sagging body described with broad calligraphic brushstrokes. The sufferers are pale, naked figures, totally consumed by the pain of their torture. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's definitely a personal favorite of mine. If you want to see longer videos on Japanese art history, you're in luck.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting, I don't know. Again, it's a good break from the more peaceful like Buddha one. Interesting. Interesting. Really like this one. Okay, next we have Muromachi period.
The Muromachi
I won't lie, I might pass if there's like a lot more stuff about Buddhism art. It's like, I'm really realizing I'm not that into it compared to maybe other style. Yeah.
period marked a huge change in Japan as the Ashikaga clan took control of the shogunate and moved the headquarters back to Kyoto to the Muromachi district of the city. With the return of the government to the capital, the popularizing trends of the Kamakura period came to an end, and cultural expression took on a more aristocratic, elitist character. In this video, we'll be covering the major events and the art of Japan's Muromachi period. The introduction of Zen Buddhism had a major impact on Japanese intellectuals.
Some more Buddhism stuff, yeah. I guess the first part is mostly the story that we already know more or less, right? Zen Buddhism, wabi-sabi.
Objects weathered by time. The concept of wabi initially referred to the quality of life led by an ascetic, but over time it developed into an aesthetic ideal to be sought after in one's daily life. The element of sabi, often paired with wabi, adds the notion of detachment and tranquility, such as what one achieves at the end of life. These two aesthetic concepts become fundamental to the performance of the tea ceremony, which developed in the 15th century out of the Zen practice of drinking strong tea in order to stay awake while meditating. And together they make wabi-sabi, which is really fun to say, and I don't think it has anything to do with wasabi. Not that I know of anyways. The composition of the Buddhist temple changed under Zen. A central complex was developed for public ceremonies, and alongside it a series of private sub-temples, or tachu, built to accommodate religious leaders, often retired abbots, and their monastic and lay adherents.
So much retired one, yeah.
Tofukuji, one of the first Zen temples to be built in Kyoto, preserves the appearance of an early Zen monastic complex. Founded in 1236 and completed in 1255, it was severely damaged by fires in 1319 and 1334, but was quickly rebuilt with the support of Bakufu leaders. Tofukuji has the earliest extant example of a new type of gate called the Sanmon, or mountain gate. Built over a period of 40 years, the gate is a two-storied structure with 3 entrance doors and a functional second story, which is accessed by a covered stairway. While the exterior preserves the more restrained and somber aesthetic of the Chinese Southern Song period building, the interior of the second floor turns to the bright ornamentation typical of Chinese decoration in the 14th and 15th centuries, with designs painted in green, red, brown, black, and gold. Enshrined in the single room are sculptures typical of Sanmon images, Shaka, and the 16 Rakan, great practitioners who had achieved.
Alright, yeah, I mean, this is, I wouldn't say it's uninteresting, but right now, I don't know. I don't feel that passionate about this. I'd rather like learn about the other style of art and MIT of the time, maybe. So let's advance. Zen Buddhism and painting. Oh, this looks interesting.
Golden age of landscape painting by these scholar officials, to which the Tan school in China was culturally very close. Remember that Zen is derived from the Chan school. The Chinese monk painters also began to paint personal, calligraphically brushed monochrome landscapes as expressions of Zen thought and practice. Along with the import of religious learnings, trading missions also brought in many Chinese paintings and objects of art, which profoundly influenced Japanese artists working for Zen temples and the shogunate. Not only was subject matter influenced, but also their
I really like this style with the almost like the constant fog, I guess I would call it.
Use of color. While Yamato-e used strong, bright colors, the Zen paintings followed the Chinese style, where painting were generally monochrome with black and white or different tones of a single color. Mokuan was ordained as a priest in Kamakura and journeyed to China to perfect his knowledge of Zen. His hanging scroll for sleepers depicts Kanzan and his friend Jitoku fast asleep with the monk Bukan and his tiger. Zen eccentrics Kanzan and Jitoku worked in the kitchen of a Chan temple in 7th century. These two embody the Zen concept of the untrammeled soul, and the monk Bukan raised Jitoku and was reputed to ride a tiger in the mountains.
Okay.
Medium gray, fairly broad strokes are used for the bodies, while fine strokes were used for the facial features, and dark ink was used for details on the shoes, belt, and hair. Only the briefest details are supplied about the setting. A light wash suggests rocks besides the figures and the shoreline before them, while darker strokes are used for the vines, tree branches, and river rocks. While sparse, each stroke is intentionally chosen with particular darkness and size for particular elements. Let's talk about 3 important painter priests who were associated with the Zen temple Shokukuji.
Alright, let's advance a little bit more. This is still about like painter, priest and stuff like that, even though I like the art a lot more, I guess, this kind of art. As I said, like the foggy kind of art, it looks pretty cool. What about this?
Where he met the Ouchi family. With the financial support of the Ouchi family, he was able to travel to China at the newly established capital of the Ming Dynasty, Beijing. There, he studied contemporary Ming landscape paintings as well as earlier Southern Song and Yan Dynasty works. When he returned to Japan, he was a much sought-after artist throughout his later life. One of his most characteristic landscapes is a winter scene, perhaps part of a set of landscape hanging scrolls of the 4 seasons. In this painting are motifs from the Chinese Southern Song landscape painting to create an original and what is considered a typically Japanese statement. In the lower right, with the motif.
Oh, sorry, Hamilton. I was going to say this one is much more manga style, it feels like, right? There's something about the stroke that feels like it.
Of 2 trees growing at the edge of the water, the viewer's eye is led back into the space by the diagonal lines of a stepped pathway along which a man with a wide-brimmed hat is climbing, presumably towards the temple complex visible above him. The hills through which he travels and the mountains in the background surround the temple buildings, making them seem like a warm oasis in a cold, icy wasteland. The foreground passages of rocks and trees are described with firm, dark brushstrokes, while the distant mountains are only outlined against the gray sky. Above, an undercut bluff fades behind the mist. This landscape painting by Sesshu is in haboku, or broken ink.
Again, like there's this constant kind of almost fog to everything, and we see like the art at this point has really evolved into like something a lot more abstract, right? Like some of the line of the actual object and shapes is kind of like fading into this fog, and I really like that. There's something very dreamy about it.
Style, and the strokes are made freely and rapidly, executed in a style in which ink seems to have been effortlessly applied. However easy it may look, it takes skill. With incredible economy of means, Sesshu has suggested land at the edge of water, large trees, and tall background mountains, and has even peopled his composition with 2 figures in the boat close to the shore, and a village of houses with the distinct flag-bearing pole of a sake house. During the 14th century, the development of great Zen monasteries in Kamakura and Kyoto had a major impact on the visual arts. Suibokuga, an austere monochrome style of ink painting, introduced from Song and Yuan dynasty China, largely
Looks nice.
replaced the polychrome scroll paintings of the previous period.
Pretty cool.
By the end of the 14th century, monochrome landscape paintings had found patronage by the ruling Ashikaga family and was the preferred genre among Zen painters.
Like this would look nice as like wallpaper, literal like, you know, wallpaper, like old house used to have. Yeah.
Gradually evolving from its Chinese roots to a more Japanese style. In the late Muromachi period, ink painting had migrated out of the Zen monasteries into the art world in general, as artists from the Kano school and the Ami school adopted the style and themes, but introduced a more plastic and decorative effect that would continue into modern times. The Ashikaga were great patrons of the art, especially those espoused by Zen masters. During the Muromachi period, two distinct cultural environments grew up around the retreats of two of the retired Ashikaga shoguns, the villa of Yoshimitsu, which became known as Kinkakuji, or the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, and the bills of his grandson Yoshimasa, or the Ginkakuji, or the Temple of Silver Pavilion.
Looks so
Both
peaceful.
were constructed as elegant settings for retirement, where Yoshimitsu and Yoshimasa could devote themselves to leisurely pursuits. Not until after their deaths were the buildings converted into temples. The Kinkakuji is a three-storied structure
Kinkakuji is maybe the most famous, right? One of those must-see kind of things.
covered in gold foil. I saw it in person and can confirm it's very shiny. Set at the edge of a large artificial lake, the gardens also have two pagodas and a large three-storied pavilion overlooking a lake. The original Kinkakuji was destroyed in 1950, but was rebuilt and restored soon after. Modeled on a Chinese prototype often seen in kara-e painting, the pavilion is designed to house several different types of activities. The first floor, which serves for informal relaxation and contemplation of the lake and garden, is provided with a Heian Shinden-style hinged lattice panels that can be raised so that the interior is opened up for viewing. The second floor, in the style favored by the warrior elite, is an enclosed L-shaped space with a deep veranda along the lake to serve as a kind of moon viewing platform.
Can you actually go inside as a tourist?
The top floor was designed as a temple room to be provided with the statues of Amida Buddha and 25 bodhisattvas, as well as a Buddha relic acquired from Engakuji in Kamakura. Yoshimasa's Ginkakuji is quite the opposite of Kinkakuji. Unlike what the name and association with the previous temple would suggest, it was never covered in silver leaf. Ginkakuji is a two-storied, two-roofed building. The first floor was used for meditation and had walls composed of sliding doors, which could be opened up to a view of the lake and extensive gardens. The second floor was designed as a chapel dedicated to Kennen, and it may have been intended to have the interior covered in silver. Unlike the gardens designed for aristocratic mansions in Nara and Heian, or the viewing gardens of Zen subtemples, the gardens of Kinkakuji and Ginkakuji were more like parks intended for leisurely walks, during which it was most important to be able to view the pavilion from different viewpoints. Yoshimitsu and Yoshimasa were both avid supporters of the arts. It was a way to give themselves legitimacy as national rulers and to eclipse the imperial court, whose role as the nation's cultural center was the last shred of function it maintained. A school of painters called the Kano school rose to prominence with Kano Masanobu. The Kano school, whose heyday was more in the second half of the 16th and the 17th century, continued to be an influence in Kanga, or Chinese-style painting. Kanga is essentially a more modern term for kara-e. The Kano were descended from a low-ranking samurai family from the area around Shizuoka Prefecture and had an affiliation not with the Zen, but with the Nichiren or Hokkei set of Buddhism.
I always like the name Nichiren.
Nichiren Buddhism began with yet another strong and charismatic.
Alright, I'll pass this part, but more art of the same kind of vibe, yeah. I really didn't realize, but at the same time I said it earlier that it kind of makes sense, right? But so much of early historical art was really based on religion, so much Buddhist art for Japan and for other country, you know, yeah. Okay. I do feel a bit bad skipping around, but again, I'm a bit over the Buddhist stuff, I feel like already. Maybe it's the French blood in me, rejecting religion. But yeah, nonetheless, there's still some good art in there that I quite like, especially the landscape. I think some of the landscape are great. I think some of the more like L-scroll kind, that are very messed up, are pretty cool. I think there's some aesthetic I definitely like. Yeah. Okay. Last video though, Azuchi Momoyama period, which I guess would encompass the Sengoku period.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Little
Wow.
Art Talks. My name is
That's a crazy good shot.
Karen, and today we're here at Lake Matosu, and it's the Shiba Sakura Festival, which is celebrating this beautiful carpet of pink moss. Let's take a closer look at the arts of the Momoyama period. In this video, we will be covering the art history of Japan's Azuchi Momoyama period. The Azuchi Momoyama period is often regarded as a Renaissance period of Japanese art history. Cities underwent urbanization and social transformation. There were major advances in architecture as castle palaces, estates, temples, and shrines were built after the destruction of war. And of course, all of these places needed decorations, so there was a great demand for decorative arts. We will be talking about fusuma, screens, and shoji. In particular, we'll be talking about the Kano school, which became very prominent with a number of major commissions. In sharp contrast to the previous Muromachi period, the Azuchi Momoyama period was characterized by a grandiose polychrome style with extensive use of gold and silver foil and works on a very large scale. We will learn about Kanga, or Chinese style, masters outside of the Kano school, as well as the revival of Yamato-e, or Japanese style painting.
Okay.
After an era of almost 100 years of warfare, Oda Nobunaga, a daimyo and a son of a minor vassal, managed to form alliances and win the battles to unify the nation under a single administration. He took de facto control of the government in 1568, and 5 years later,
I guess we know all that. We covered the Sengoku Jidai in such detail. Mitsuhide, the Great Betrayer, Hideyoshi, the Madman. Maybe it's not a good way to describe him.
90,000 men fought against Ieyasu's 180,000. Ieyasu managed to take the Osaka castle. Hideyori committed suicide. His young son,
the end of the Sanada family.
Sons were killed, his supporters were executed, and the castle was razed to the ground. 250 years of uncontested Tokugawa rule then began. Between 1580 and 1640, Japanese society underwent rapid urbanization. Kyoto was returned to its previous splendor, and Edo became a rapidly growing metropolis at the center of Tokugawa Bakufu. Ports in Nagasaki and Osaka also flourished during this period. Other new cities grew up around the castles of several of the major daimyo, including Himeji, Kanazawa, Hiroshima, Okayama, Kunamoto, Hikone, Shizuoka, and Nagoya. Their creation during this period has been characterized by the historian John Whitney Hall as perhaps the most intensive urban construction in world history. Although peace had returned to the nation, not much has improved for the farming peasants since the Heian or medieval periods. Little better than bonded serfs, the burden of taxation.
I mean, I guess they have to wait until Edo. For the most part, things kind of improve in Edo period.
Only increased as the Edo period went on. Furthermore, due to the recent events, many of the traditional land holdings were taken away. Thousands fled to the new towns to find work, often in craftsmen's guilds or as merchants. These two groups, called chonin, were considered the lowest of the social classes, but interestingly enough, during the late medieval period they accumulated great wealth in cities and provided a new base of patronage for the arts. By the Momoyama and early Edo periods, these wealthier, educated sections of the artisans and merchants had formed a distinct demographic within the chonin class. Two new forms of buildings were developed during the 16th and 17th centuries to meet the needs of the new elite. A new type of permanent stronghold was developed to serve as the seat of government for the domain, the residence for the local daimyo, a garrison for his army, and a fortress impregnable to arrows, catapults, and towards the end of the period, the firearms introduced by European traders. Above all, palace castles such as Azuchi, Momoyama, Osaka, and later Edo were a stage set that proclaimed the power and importance of their lord. Unfortunately,
such a shame that the Osaka castle burned.
None of these great castles of the period, Azuchi, Momoyama, or Osaka, has survived to the present, and what remains of Edo.
Yeah, the only one that survived are like the smaller castles, right, which still feel kind of weird to call them castles. They're more like fortification to me than the actual castles like Osaka, yeah.
Edo Castle reflects much later alterations. Another architectural innovation of the Momoyama period was the shoin, an elaborate form of residence that evolved out of the aristocratic shinden. Its development began with the political ascendancy of the samurai class in the medieval period, but it reached its mature form in this period. Shoin architecture, and particularly the living reception room, reflects the formalized relationship between samurai lord and retainer. The most important room in a shoin was the space where the master might entertain his lord or his vassals. In the most developed form, it consisted of 2 levels. The floor of the upper section was elevated a few inches above the lower. The highest-ranking samurai, whether he was the master of the house or not, sat on the upper level. Behind him would be a tokonama, a shallow raised alcove where a scroll might be hung and a flower arrangement or an object of value might be displayed. Next to that, there were usually another alcove with compartments and a group of interconnected shelves at different heights. On another wall, there were usually a set of 4.
That was so empty, it's one of those things where like, the tatami part is really not filled with a lot, right? It's so empty feeling.
Fusuma. During the Momoyama period, screens and fusuma came into wide use in residential architecture for the nobility, the daimyo, and the samurai and wealthy townsmen. In conjunction, there developed a new aesthetic for bright colors, including gold and silver paint on a ground of gold leaf or occasionally silver leaf. It has been suggested that gold leaf became popular because it reflected and augmented the dim light in castles. Another theory is that the specific landscape screens using gold leaf and bright colors were intended to suggest the gold and jeweled environment of Amida's Western paradise. While both of these conjectures are justifiable, it is also true that the gold grounds were a natural expression of the sudden affluence of the Momoyama period. Paintings on sliding doors, called fusuma, and freestanding folding screens, called byobu, while not unique to Japan, were developed into major formats for painting in the Momoyama and Edo periods. The basic module for both fusuma and byobu is a panel consisting of a light wood frame enclosing a lattice of thin wood strips. Over this foundation, pieces of paper are pasted to build up a backing that can support the surface, usually paper but occasionally silk, on which a painting has been executed.
The only thing with stuff like that is the amount of work it must take to make something that looks so good, right? And it's probably very easily ruined, right? What it takes is one person tripping and going headfirst into this, and it's destroyed. Obviously, like, this is the rich, so they don't care, They can just contract someone to do it again, but it seems so easily destroyed.
Fusuma door is provided with an outer frame, usually black lacquered wood, and a metal handhold near one edge, enabling the door to be pushed back and forth without damaging the painted surface. Screen panels are narrower than fusuma and are joined together with a complicated system of hinges. The perimeter of the whole is framed, usually with wood that is lacquered black. Another door and window treatment popular from the Momoyama period onward is the shoji. What distinguishes the shoji, whether fixed in place or used as sliding doors, is the translucent white paper pasted over one side of a wood lattice work like that at the core of the fusuma. Shoji give a Japanese room a soft, diffuse light and a sense of separation from the outdoors or the adjoining space. Both Hideyoshi and the early Tokugawa shoguns agreed on the importance of a stable and fairly prosperous emperor and court, albeit one with a cultural rather than a political role. The aristocratic mansion also experiences a revival during this period, and one of the most superbly designed buildings of the early 18th century is the Palace Retreat, the Katsura Imperial Villa located on the Katsura River to the southwest of Kyoto. Built originally between 1620 and 1624 for Prince Toshihito, the buildings and surrounding grounds combine a style of artlessness known as sukiya, a subdued and unostentatious effect achieved through the painstaking attention to detail, with specific elements recreated from the Genji Monogatari, one of the prince's favorite books. As described in the novel, Prince Toshihito's villa has in its grounds a large lake with several artificial islands, a rustic fishing pavilion, and a lodge next to the race course for the games held in conjunction with the festival at the Kamigamo Shrine in Kyoto. Inside, no provision was made for emphasizing the rank of individual guests by different floor levels or by connotative images in the tokonoma. The palace was designed for informal assembly of courtiers and the imperial family, as a place where they could put aside issues of social class in a relaxed atmosphere and enjoy the few gentle cultural pursuits the Tokugawa Bakufu permitted them. Art during this period is characterized in notably more secular themes and is separated into two distinct phases. The first is roughly contiguous with the regimes of Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. The taste of these military men were more brash and bold, and the period is characterized by their exuberant expansiveness.
Especially Hideyoshi, you can imagine that, again, the man literally started at the bottom. He was not a noble, a samurai in any way. He was like a normal guy who ended up in the military as a foot soldier, right? And rose to the top. Nobunaga, he was noble from the beginning, but not Hideyoshi. So you can imagine that what he would be into would be very different,
Characteristic of this first phase is employed by brilliant colors, gold leaf grounds, and strong decorative patterns. In painting, the preferred formats were sliding door panels, known as fusuma, and folding screens, or byobu. The second begins with the Tokugawa ascendancy. The phase is shaped by the group of artists whose taste had been formed within the world of the wealthy and educated chonin, who impose their ideas on their patrons. Their work returns to older traditions of painting, reworked and adapted to the desire for monumentality or eye-catching design in the late 16th and early 17th century. The period is marked by self-assurance, a spirit of reflective introspection, and a calculated return to historical precedents. Scenes of contemporary life were common in secular themes since at least the Heian times, but its revival in the 16th century is a consequence of Tosa Mitsunobu's invention of the Rakuchu Rakugai in the previous Muromachi period. A pair of Rakuchu Rakugai screens known as the Funaki set are dated to 1614 to 1615, when the Tokugawa were making their final assault on the Osaka castle to the south of the capital. Likely commissioned by a wealthy member of the Chonin class, the images of the city depicted in these screens could not be more different than those shown on the Rekihaku screens of the 1530s. Both were idealized visions of Kyoto, but while in the Rekihaku set, large banks of clouds or fields covered.
I definitely like the style of the top one more, Yeah.
Areas were likely barren wasteland. The Funaki set lack the open space and show Hideyoshi's reconstruction of the city. The more crowded view of the city is also due to the more intimate view, showing the city from a lower altitude. Read from right to left, the focal point of the right screen is in the first two scenes, the Hokoji, Hideyoshi's challenge to the Daibutsu-den of Todaiji. At the top of the two middle panels is his mausoleum. On the left screen's first panels are the portable shrines of the Gion procession, and on the last two panels is the Nijo castle of the Tokugawa. The sandwiching of the city between the old and new regimes has been interpreted as a demonstration of the tensions during this pivotal period between winter 1614 and summer 1615. The 16th century was also a period of not just Japanese travel, but also many foreigners coming to Japan to...
This I hope she explains. I've seen this kind of art before in some of the video we watched. Why were foreigners always portrayed with massive ass and big ass thighs like this? Did they actually have pants that look like this, or is there any significance?
Trade. It was at this time that the first European traders arrived, and with them came Christian missionaries, in particular priests of the Franciscan and Jesuit orders. The missionaries met some success, converting some leading daimyo, but they were largely met with suspicion by the ruling elite. In 1587, Hideyoshi prohibited the practices by Japanese of Christianity and chased the Jesuits from the port of Nagasaki. A genre called nanban, or Southern Barbarian screens, depict images of these foreigners. They depict the Dutch and Portuguese missionaries and traders, often portrayed as tall, mustachioed men in pantaloons and flowing capes.
Okay, so
a common type of composition is the arrival of the many-masted foreign galleon at the Japanese port, and the ship's crew going to Nambanji, the Jesuit church in Kyoto. Unlike normal Japanese practice, these folding screens are read from left to right, likely a nod to European habits. Now let's talk about the Kano school of artists, who are responsible for some of the most iconic artistic works of the Momoyama period. The school first attracted patronage in the late 15th century and was particularly famous for their kanga, or Chinese-style painting. As the 16th century progressed, two distinct types of painting began to emerge, in addition to the genres previously discussed. The first is the blue and gold style, which are landscapes and figural themes that are depicted on a monumental scale in brilliant colors on a gold or silver background. The second type maintained the monochromatic tonalities and often the Chinese pictorial themes of the Muromachi period, but the compositions were bolder and more decorative. The Kano school, patronized by Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and their followers, gained tremendously in size and prestige. Let's talk about three important figures of the Kano school from this period: Kano Eitoku, Kano Mitsunobu, and Kano Sanraku. Kano Eitoku is credited for some of the greatest innovation during this time. He painted the Fusuma panels for the Jukoin, a small compound within a Zen temple of Kyoto.
Is this preserved up to today? Or is this like a reproduction? I don't know.
In the central room facing the garden, he created a new architectonic formula for distributing motifs around the three interior walls. Landscapes of the four seasons are depicted across 16 panels, enclosing the east, north, and west walls against a ground delicately streaked with gold. Eitoku's formula for Fusuma decoration differs from earlier treatments in that he chose not to place vertical motifs, such as tree trunks, at the four corners of the room to echo the wooden corner posts. Instead, he used three massive trees, a gnarled plum symbolizing spring, and two pines suggesting winter, in diagonally opposite corners of the room, and distributed other motifs to draw the viewer's eye deeper into the pictorial space. While he makes dramatic use of the large-scale motifs and strong brushwork, at the same time he subtly depicts space and delicately contrasts gray ink, white paper, and pale gold mists.
Like seriously, I would definitely enjoy having a scroll version of that, on my wall or something. Yeah.
Cypress, an 8-panel byobu attributed to Kano Eitoku, exemplifies his later, more formulaic style for his blue and gold works. The painting was later trimmed along its short sides, somewhat distorting our view of the original composition. Today, the right half is dominated by a massive tree, and the left by a pond and sharply faceted rocks, and the whole is unified by a gold leaf ground. The elements are arranged much as in the Jukoin painting, but the naturalism and playfulness of the 1566 work are absent here. Now the emphasis is on the solid sculptural forms against a backdrop of gold. After Eitoku's death in 1590, his son Mitsunobu became the head of the main branch of the Kano school. Mitsunobu turned away from his father's dramatic, monumental style in favor of a flatter, more elegant, and detailed manner. He worked with
Still very
Yamato
nice.
for Japanese-style themes, such as birds and flowers of the four seasons. One of his most successful paintings is the series of designs he executed for the Tokonoma and Fusuma panels in the main room of the Kakuden in the Kangakuen enclosure of Ongoji on Lake Biwa. Mitsunobu's approach to the room was the antithesis of his father's preferred formula. Instead of trying to unify the room as a single architectural entity and to create the impression of walls dissolving into natural space, Mitsunobu stressed the differences between the various parts of the room, the tall, wide Tokonoma and the shorter, smaller Fusuma, and reasserted flatness and unitary quality of the individual Fusuma panels. His pictorial theme, Flowers and Trees of the Four Seasons, begins on the east wall to the right of the Tokonoma with plum blossoms and camellias, followed on the south wall by a row of cedar and flowering cherry trees. The west wall of the room is devoted to the flowers of summer and the russet leaves of the fall. The sequence climaxes in the last Fusuma panel, on the north wall and the focal point of the room. The winter landscape of the Tokonoma is a waterfall descending between evergreens and mixing with roiled waters along the snow-rimmed shore. Broad areas of flat gold leaf indicate ground or clouds and contains the floral motifs within shallow space. Mitsunobu stresses the flatness of the wall surface and somewhat awkward proportions of the room at the Kangakuen, presenting an interesting counterpoint to...
I guess I like his animal stuff more than the one with the cloud in the back. I think the animal part looked better.
His father's handling of the similar space at the Jukoen. The most talented artist of the Kano school, who continued to work in the dramatic style pioneered by Eitoku, was Kano Sanraku. Originally, Sanraku was a page in the service of Hideyoshi, who recognized the boy's talent and placed him in Eitoku's studio. He was subsequently adopted by Eitoku. Sanraku retreated somewhat from Eitoku's imagery, substituting first a naturalism of expression and then a quality of elegant ornamentation. This is in line with the second phase of painting at...
Look at this. Dragon and tigers. That's cool.
The time, as it reassesses the Kangae and Yamato-e styles of the Heian and medieval periods. It was a phase that represents a more intellectual approach to the pictorial content on the part of the artist, and often also the commissioner, whether in reworking Yamato-e themes or in interpreting complex and unfamiliar subjects from Chinese literature. In the early 17th century, Sanraku was asked to paint Fusuma panels depicting scenes from the Genji Monogatari. 4 panels of the set still exist, now refashioned.
It's kind of like fan art. It's amazing. It's fan art from like hundreds of years ago, right? People really loved the Genji Monogatari. I mean, Genji Monogatari was really like the I don't know, Dragon Ball or One Piece of back then, right? People loved it. Yeah.
Into a single screen. The episode depicted is the carriage fight, one of the most famous incidents of the first part of the novel. Sanraku adapted the techniques of narrative imakimono to the large-scale format of the Fusuma. The essentials of the story in these screens are clear from a distance, but a closer view brings a wealth of interesting details. The carriage attendants of Lady Rokujo, a lover of Prince Genji, scuffle with those accompanying that of Genji's wife, Lady Aoi, as both groups jockey for a good vantage point along the route of the Kamigamo Festival Parade. In the right half of the screen, the procession of noblemen escorting the Vestal Virgin of the Kamigamo, an unmarried young woman from a noble family, moves leftwards towards the melee of carriage attendants that
It's interesting because if you look at it from far away, all the little white figure people almost looks like flower petals, right? If you zoom in, you see it more, but
dominates the left half. The composition and style of the painting, as well as the figures and poses, are reminiscent of the maki of the Tosa style of the mid-13th century. Hasegawa Tohaku, a contemporary of Eitoku, was a great independent practitioner of the decorative style. With his Buddhist connection,
man, it looks nice, the wave. They look so perfect.
In Kyoto, he was able to frequent temples which owned important works of art from the masters of the Muromachi period, but also the Chinese masterpieces of the Song and Yuan dynasties. His painting Reaching for the Moon is clearly based on Mu Shi's painting of the female monkey protectively cradling her child. However, Tohaku has addressed the Zen idea of the monkey as a symbol for the unenlightened human being and created an allegory for the impossibility of possessing absolute knowledge. The monkey, an impractical romantic, reaches out to catch the moon, believing it to be in the pond below him as he mistakes the reflection for the real thing. Another major influence of Tohaku's style was the brilliantly colored decorative style of the Kano school. He worked in the studio of Kano Shoei, Eitoku's father, but later left to establish himself as an independent artist. In 1592, he was given exclusive charge of the painted decoration of Shounji. Following the fall of the Toyotomi faction, the temple was destroyed, and the few paintings that survived were cut down and installed in the Shingon Temple of Chishakuin. These works are in Tohaku's blue and gold style, as well as being one of the first reworkings of Yamato-e themes, particularly the 4 panels depicting a simple maple tree, its leaves just beginning to change color. In contrast to Eitoku's placement of the plum and pine trees near the corners of the central room in the Jukoen, Tohaku locates his massive trunk of the maple on a diagonal across the 2 central panels, and the branches are like arms extending gracefully to the sides of the painting. Flowers of the fall, including the chrysanthemums and coxcomb, create a solid base for the tree, along with a low rock and bush clover, whose green leaf branches mingle with the green, orange, and brown leaves of the maple. The gold background of the painting, interspersed with passages of deep blue, at one moment appears to be terra firma, at another to be clouds obscuring the blue water of a lake or river.
I don't know what terra firma
In Pine
is.
Forest, Tohaku demonstrates his ability.
And the contrast, like so colorful for one, and then this one is like Silent Hill, again, the very foggy feeling as I keep describing it.
To reinterpret formal styles while retaining a sense of tradition and timelessness. In it, tall trees are seen as if from a distance. Thick mist flows amongst them, obscuring the lower half of some, the mid-trunk of others, appearing to float like ghostly forms in and out of the mist. The artists most closely associated with the revival of Yamato-e themes in the late 16th and early 17th century is Honami Koetsu and his kinsman Tawaraya Sotatsu. Koetsu is a good example of the new kind of educated man emerging from the Chonin class. He was a dynamic figure in all the arts of the Momoyama and early Edo periods, as a descendant of a Kyoto family that cleaned, polished, and appraised swords for the military. Gradually, their appraisals extended to other areas of expertise, including calligraphy. He was famous for his calligraphy, but was also an amateur potter and devotee of the tea ceremony, and even worked in an atelier as a young man. The two of them engaged in many collaborations, combining Koetsu's calligraphy with Sotatsu's design and painting. Not much is known about Sotatsu's birth. He appears to have begun his career as a commercial painter and proprietor of the Tawaraya fan shop. He went on to create large-scale decorative screens and the Fusuma paintings in the blue and gold manner. His major works represent the last flowering of the Momoyama painting. A particularly beautiful example of their collaboration is a page from their transcription of poems from one of the imperial collections of poetry. The poem is by the late 12th century poet Kamo no Chome. The writing is both vigorous and sensuous, filling the entire page, while Sotatsu has created an underlying image of the paper in green, gold, and silver.
But it feels like some of the character at the bottom and the black part kind of fades in, so it's hard to read. No?
Showing a close-up view of a rice paddy where the plants are hanging heavy with grain. This pair of 2-paneled screens depict Raijin, god of thunder, and Fujin, god of wind. The screens were probably made sometime after 1621. Sotatsu used the same demon image from the Kitano and Giyamaki scroll, which Sotatsu is known to have studied. The source of the god of wind is not known for certain. He may have taken it from a section of the scroll no longer extant, or he may have taken the imagery from a pair of 13th century Keisuko statues in the Sanju Sangendo. The god of thunder in the upper left corner of the left screen is a striking white figure against the gold ground and silver rain clouds. His garments are depicted in flat, solid colors, blue, green, and orange, but his horns are a subtle blend of black, beige, and green. This technique, called tarashikomi, involves applying one color over another color, not yet dry, to make them blend in a rich and irregular fashion. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm doing a whole series on Japanese art.
Unfortunately, that's the last one. I guess we don't get anything for Edo period and further, but okay. Okay, I definitely really like the Azuchi Momoyama period art. You know, I guess we've moved away quite a bit, even though I'm sure there's still quite a lot of Buddhist stuff. I think we moved in a good direction. Great videos, yeah? Great videos. Yeah, as the comments say, it's sad that this series isn't continued. Okay, well, I learned quite a bit. I'm definitely, you know, not, as I said, I'm not as into like the Buddhist art stuff as much, because I find a lot of it repetitive, right? All the slightly altered Buddha statue, I think that's where you lose me a little bit. You know, I think it's cool. Like, some of the individual statues are cool, but you know, I'm not that into to the point of like wanting to learn about like every process for every little difference between Buddha statue. I think that's where I got lost a little bit watching this. That's why we skipped around a bit. But again, there's quite a few things here that I really like visually, like to the point where I would have something like that in my room. A replica, obviously, but you know, some of the later Azuchi Momoyama art, some of the L scroll, there's some good stuff there. Some of the Emaki, I like the Emaki too. I mean, there's some style and some kind of like magnificent feeling to all of it. So some of them I would definitely have, yeah. Like some kind of replica. Maybe one day, who knows. Like these days, the only thing I have on my wall is this wall scroll of Iron Maiden. Obviously it's to cover the back, right? But the rest of my room is just white wall, basically. But yeah. Anyway, that was kind of fun to watch again. That was a playlist of videos and a channel that I found kind of like by accident when I was looking for like stream ideas. And I wanted to watch it, and again, you know, I think there was some interesting stuff to learn here and kind of see the evolution of art. So I learned quite a bit, and that's the point of the streams. I learned quite a bit, so do check out the original channel. Once again, the playlist is linked in the description. Link to my Discord, stream account, Patreon as always if you want to follow, support me, and request reaction. And yeah, there's more Japan, learning about Japan historic stream coming. I might do another one in 2 days or something. I don't know what I'll do next. I'll think about it. I just need to build playlists first, you know, like find enough videos about certain topic to do like a dedicated stream, you know. But any suggestion is very welcome as always. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the reaction. Like, subscribe, comment, ちゃんと登録よろしくお願いします. I'll see you guys next time. See you.